Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving back from my coworker Jenna's place on a Tuesday night, a little after 11. She lived out past the edge of town, one of those new developments built next to miles of empty fields. But the drive was usually quick, just 15 minutes along County Road 12, a straight shot with barely any traffic that late. I'd done it dozens of times. The night was clear, cool, nothing unusual. I wasn't tired, just ready to get home, shower, and crash. I remember thinking how bright my headlights looked when I pulled onto the county road, slicing across the gravel shoulder and lighting up the asphalt in a clean beam. Then, maybe 3 minutes into the drive, the beams started to dull. Not flicker, just fade. It happened slowly, like the darkness ahead thickened and swallowed some of the light. At first, I thought maybe my high beams had switched off accidentally, but the dashboard icon was still lit. The headlights were technically on, but they weren't doing their job. Everything 10 or 15 feet ahead of my bumper looked softer, muted, like I'd driven into a faint fog even though the air was perfectly clear. I tapped the lights off and on again. No change. The road kept absorbing the brightness like it was endless cloth. I tried to tell myself it was just some trick of the air or humidity, but my hands had tightened on the wheel. My chest felt tense in a way I didn't have a name for. A moment later, the radio, just background music I barely paid attention to, cut out mid-song. No static, no warning. Just silence. The screen still showed it was playing, but no sound came through. The silence in the car felt too absolute, like the air inside thickened too. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, suspended above the road maybe 100 yards ahead. Not bright enough to light anything around it, not shaped like anything I could identify. Just a pale smudge of light, hanging in place like someone had pressed their thumb against the sky and left a soft print behind. It didn't move toward me or away. It stayed exactly where it was. I slowed down without deciding to, dropped from 50 to 30, then to 20. The glow stayed the same size the entire time, which made no sense. If it were far away, it shouldn't look identical at different speeds. If it were close, I would have reached it already. The dimming headlights almost made it worse. They illuminated the road just enough to make the darkness around the glow feel unnatural, like the light from the car and the glow overhead were refusing to interact. Then my dashboard clock flickered. It jumped from 11:14 to 11:17. Just like that. No fade, no glitch. A 3-minute skip. I breathed out hard through my nose, trying to steady myself. I'd had electrical issues in cars before, but nothing like this. The engine still ran smoothly. The steering felt normal, but everything else, the lights, the radio, the display, seemed to react to whatever was up ahead. At about 50 yards away, the faint glow started to dim. Not suddenly, almost reluctantly, like it was losing interest. First it thinned around the edges, then the center faded until it dissolved completely. The headlights seemed to strengthen the moment it disappeared, brightening back to their proper level as if someone had lifted a shade from in front of them. I drove forward slowly until I reached the exact stretch of road where the glow had been. There was nothing there. No fog, no insects, no light reflecting off low clouds. The asphalt looked the same as always, gray, cracked, barely maintained. The fields on both sides were silent except for the sound of the engine idling. The radio came back on, picking up in the middle of the exact same song, like it had never paused. The headlights stayed strong. Even the night itself seemed to return to normal, as if whatever had been there was gone for good. I sat there in the middle of the road, engine running, trying to make sense of what happened. I checked my phone, still on 11:17. The car clock matched it. 3 minutes missing from somewhere I couldn't account for, even though I remembered every second of the drive. I kept expecting another faint glow to appear overhead, or the lights to dim again, but nothing happened. Eventually, I put the car in gear and kept driving. That should have been the end of it. But about a mile down the road, I passed an area where the field grass grew taller than the fence posts. As my headlights swept across the tall grass, the beam bent, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough that the edges of the light curved inward, like it was bending around something I couldn't see. There was nothing in front of me. Nothing casting shadows, nothing blocking the light. Yet, the edges of the beam curved for a full second before snapping back to normal. It was so quick I almost thought I imagined it, but the hairs on my arms lifted immediately. My foot eased off the gas. My heartbeat picked up again. Whatever passed over the road earlier hadn't just been light. It altered something in the air, like the space itself had been warped or stretched for a moment and then reset. I didn't stop this time. I just kept driving. When I finally reached the turn toward my neighborhood, the street lamps looked brighter than usual. Almost too bright, like my eyes were still adjusting from something I couldn't see anymore. My porch lights were on when I got home, even though I never leave them on when I go out. The dog next door barked once, short and confused, then went silent. Inside the house, everything was normal. My phone didn't glitch. The wall clock matched the car. But for the rest of the night, every time I walked past a window, I half expected to see a faint glow hovering above the street, waiting the way it had waited over the road. I didn't see it again. The night passed without anything else strange happening. But every time I drive that same route now, especially when it's late and quiet, I keep my eyes on the stretch where the light once hung. The headlights seem to dim just the tiniest bit whenever I reach it, only for a moment. So subtle, I almost convince myself it isn't real. Almost. I know what dimmed headlights look like. I know what fog and high beams and clouds do. And what I saw that night wasn't any of those things. It was like something else was absorbing the light, something waiting there in the dark, suspended above the road, long enough for me to notice, and long enough to know exactly when to disappear. I woke up because of the light. Not bright light, just the faint glow of my phone screen lying face down on the nightstand. I could see the reflection of it on the wall, a soft rectangle pulsing every few seconds like it was trying to get my attention. I reached over, half asleep, and when I picked it up, the screen said, "Recording saved, 3:02 a.m." I never start recordings in my sleep. I don't even use the voice memo app. When I opened it, the clip was 37 seconds long. No waveform spikes, no talking, just this low hum, steady and smooth like a far-off engine. Right near the end, there was a single metallic click. Sharp, clean, like someone tapping a ring against a railing. I just stared at the screen for a minute. My apartment was dead quiet. No traffic, no neighbors, no pets, nothing that could have made that sound. I didn't hit play again. Not right away. Instead, I got up and checked the front door, even though I knew it was locked. I checked the kitchen window, the bathroom, my bedroom closet, everything untouched. The place felt normal, but I couldn't shake this crawling feeling under my skin, like the air had changed while I was asleep. It was early March, cool enough outside that the windows collected that thin fog around the edges. When I went back into my bedroom, the fog on the glass caught my attention. Someone had wiped a streak in it, a short vertical line, maybe from a fingertip. I don't sleepwalk, and I had definitely closed the curtains. I replayed the recording then, holding the phone up to my ear. The hum sounded deeper the second time, almost physical. Not vibration, not bass. Just presence. The metallic click still didn't sound like anything familiar from my building. Not pipes, not heat vents, nothing like that. It was too deliberate. I lay back down, wide awake, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But I kept listening for that hum, half expecting it to start up somewhere in the walls. It didn't. The next morning on my way to work, I tried to not think about it. I work security for a warehouse outside Missoula, boring overnight shifts most nights, but I'd swapped with another guard and ended up off that night. Lucky timing, I guess. The sun was out, the town looked normal, and for a while I managed to convince myself sleep deprivation had played tricks on me. That lasted until I checked my background apps at lunchtime. The voice recorder had been opened 3 separate times between 2:58 and 3:04 a.m. I hadn't touched my phone during that window. I hadn't even moved from the bed except to sit up. Something about seeing the exact timestamps made the whole thing feel heavier, like it wasn't just a glitch or an accidental tap. Something had woken me right in the middle of it. When I got home that afternoon, I went straight to the bedroom. The fog on the window had dried, but the streak was still there, just barely visible in the dust. A single narrow line, like a nail or a fingertip, dragged downward. I checked the lock on the window. Secure. The screen in place. That night, I set the phone on my dresser instead of the nightstand. I didn't turn on any special apps or motion sensors. I just wanted to see if anything would happen if I wasn't touching it. I woke up twice before sunrise, once at 40, then again around 4. No light, no sound, just regular half-awake moments. Both times the phone was where I left it, but when I checked it in the morning, the voice recorder had another new file. Length 12 seconds. Timestamp 3:02 a.m. again. I hadn't woken up at 3. I hit play. The first few seconds were silent, not quiet. Silent, like the phone had cut out everything except its own internal noise. Then the hum started again, the same deep, steady sound from the night before. Only this time it felt closer, louder, like it was directly above the phone instead of somewhere in the room. There was no metallic click at the end, just a short, uneven scrape before the recording stopped. My hands were shaking a little when I locked the screen. Not fear exactly, more like confusion sharpening into something uneasy. I didn't know what to look for or what to expect. I just felt watched, which made no sense because the apartment was small and I could see every corner of it. I left for work early, hoping a change of scene would help. It didn't. All shift, I kept glancing at my phone, even though I'd turned everything off. The anxiety felt stupid, but it was real. Around midnight, a coworker named Travis stopped by my station. He's older, late 50s, talks a lot more than he listens, but he's decent enough. "You look tired," he said. "Everything okay at home?" I shrugged it off, said it was just bad sleep. But he didn't move on right away. Instead, he asked, "You hear that humming last night? Thought it was a generator out on the southwest side, but couldn't find anything running." My chest tightened. I asked him what time. He said, "Little after 3. Why?" I didn't tell him why. After work, I bought a cheap baby monitor from a 24-hour pharmacy, not the camera kind, just audio. I didn't want video. I didn't want to see something I couldn't explain. But I wanted to know if the sound was real or if the phone was picking up some weird electrical interference. That night, I plugged the monitor into the wall near my bed and left the receiver on the pillow next to me. I fell asleep faster than I expected. When I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the curtains. I sat up too quickly, grabbing the receiver before my eyes were fully open. The battery indicator was flashing, but the saved audio alert was lit. I replayed it immediately. The recording wasn't long, maybe 20 seconds, but it started with a faint crackle, like static building in slow bursts. Then the hum came in, deeper than I remembered, vibrating through the cheap speaker in a way that made the plastic casing buzz in my hand. About halfway through, another sound layered on top of it. Not the metallic click this time, something softer, like fabric brushing or someone shifting their weight on the floor. It was subtle but unmistakable. It had rhythm, presence. Then the hum cut out abruptly. No fade, no distortion, just gone. I checked the time the monitor had logged it, 3:02 a.m. My phone, sitting untouched on the dresser, also had a new recording saved at 3:02 a.m. I didn't listen to that one right away. I walked the apartment first, slowly. Every room, every window, every lock, everything was exactly where it should be, but the feeling, the pressure in the air, the wrongness, hung over everything like static before a storm. Only after I'd checked it all twice did I sit on the edge of the bed and open the phone's recording. This one started differently. A sharp intake of breath. Mine, I think, like I'd stirred in my sleep just before the app started capturing. Then the hum, but softer, almost restrained. And under it, buried so faintly I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been holding the phone to my ear, was something else. Not a word, not breathing, just a single quiet metallic click. Exactly like the first night. I stopped halfway through and closed the app. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that whatever this was, it was intentional. Something was coming back at exactly the same time, 3 nights in a row, and the only proof I had were these strange little audio fragments. That day, I called in sick. I didn't want to leave the apartment, but I didn't want to stay in it either. I just drove around the city, aimlessly, letting traffic mask the anxiety clawing at me. When evening came, I didn't set up the monitor again. Didn't do anything special. I just left my phone on the couch and tried to fall asleep out there, hoping the change of location might break the pattern. I woke at 3:02 a.m., wide awake. The apartment was dark and still, but I heard something, just for a second, in the direction of the bedroom. A soft tap, not metallic, barely there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The sound didn't repeat. When I finally turned on a light and checked my phone, there was no new recording. Nothing. I waited until the sun came up before going back into the bedroom. The window looked normal. The curtains were in place. The streak was still faintly there, but unchanged. I still don't know what to make of any of it. The recordings stopped after that night, and nothing strange has happened since. But every time I wake up in the middle of the night, even for something normal, my first instinct is to check the clock. Always checking for 3:02. I was already half awake when the ceiling started to brighten. I don't know why. I hadn't heard anything, and my phone wasn't buzzing. It was one of those early hours moments where your mind floats just above sleep, and any tiny change snaps you further awake. I remember staring at the ceiling, not even fully processing what I was seeing at first. The glow wasn't like a car passing outside or someone turning on a hallway light. It was too even, too soft. A pale white color, almost gray, spreading from the center of the ceiling outward. It didn't have edges. It was like the room itself was exhaling light. I stayed still for a long moment, watching it grow brighter. Not harsh, never harsh, but undeniably brighter, enough that the corners of my room took shape. My dresser, the pile of clothes I hadn't folded, the outline of the door. It looked like the start of dawn, except there was no window above me. Just plaster. My first thought was that maybe someone had pulled into the driveway. My bedroom faces the backyard, not the street, but light can bounce in weird ways. Still, it didn't look like reflected light. It looked like the source was inside the room, above me. I didn't move. I don't know why. Something in my chest tightened, like sitting up too fast might disturb whatever was happening. The glow kept strengthening in this slow, steady way, and I just lay there feeling more awake by the second. Right as I finally pushed myself upright, the light vanished. Not gradually. Instantly. One moment the room had a pale haze to it, and the next it was pitch black again. My eyes strained so hard to readjust that it hurt. I blinked several times, reaching for my phone on the nightstand. When I tapped the screen, the brightness felt jarringly artificial after what I had just seen. It was 3:12 a.m. I sat there for a while, listening for anything that might explain it. But the house was quiet, not silent, just normal quiet. Refrigerator hummed. The faint tick from the old wall clock down the hall. Nothing that matched a bright, room-filling glow. Eventually, I got up and checked the hallway, then the living room. The front door was locked. The curtains were undisturbed. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard sat still under a nearly moonless sky. Not even the motion light had turned on. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I must have been dreaming more intensely than I thought. But when I went back to my bedroom, something felt off, like the air had changed. Not warmer or colder, just different, as if someone had opened a door earlier and shut it quietly. I got back into bed and lay there on my side, staring at the ceiling again. It looked normal, a little uneven from when the last owners had repainted it, but normal. After maybe 10 minutes, I started drifting off again. That's when I noticed the sound, a faint, low vibration. Not even a sound, really, more like the smallest shift in pressure, the kind you might feel in an elevator between floors. It pulsed once, soft enough that if I'd been asleep, I wouldn't have felt it. Then again, and again. 3 pulses total. Each one was spaced almost evenly, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I held my breath without meaning to. The vibration wasn't coming from the floor or the walls. It felt like it came from above, directly above, the exact place where the glow had been spreading. I sat up again, slower this time. No light appeared. No more pulses, just dark, regular, normal room. That somehow felt worse. I got up again, this time grabbing my phone flashlight and pointing it at the ceiling. Nothing. No marks, no cracks, no insects or shadows, just slightly uneven white paint. Still, the air near the ceiling felt faintly warmer than the rest of the room when I raised my hand toward it. Not significantly, just enough to notice. I backed away and sat down on the edge of the bed. My breathing felt louder than it should have. I kept glancing at the ceiling, waiting for the glow to start again, half hoping it would, because at least then I'd know I hadn't imagined it. Instead, the room stayed dark. I didn't sleep again for the rest of the night. I walked the house twice, sat in the living room with the lamp on until dawn cracked through the blinds. When the real morning light finally hit the walls, I felt this weird rush of relief, like the sun itself had confirmed something about the night didn't belong to it. Later that morning, when I headed out for work, I noticed something strange in the backyard. The grass directly behind the house, just a patch maybe 3 feet wide, looked pressed down like something had settled there overnight. Not footprints, not an animal shape, just a smooth depression, almost as if heat had flattened it. I crouched down and touched the grass. It wasn't warm, but it didn't feel cold from the night air either. More like the temperature had equalized unusually fast. I didn't mention it to anyone. What was I supposed to say? That my ceiling lit up without a source and the backyard looked like something had hovered above it? That night, I stayed up later than usual. Not on purpose, just nervous energy. When I finally went to bed, I kept the hallway light on. Not that it would make a difference if something like that glow came back, but the thought of total darkness didn't sit right with me. Around midnight, before drifting off, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, half waiting for a brightening that never came. But every now and then, even weeks later, I'll wake up suddenly in the middle of the night with this weird certainty that the room is brighter than it should be. Not enough to see anything, just enough to feel it. And sometimes when I sit up quickly enough, the darkness seems deeper than it should be, like something just moved out of the way. I was taking one of my late walks around the neighborhood, the kind I do when my head feels too loud to stay inside. It was close to midnight, early October, cool enough that you could see your breath in short puffs. The streets were empty, which wasn't unusual for my part of town. Just a regular suburban grid outside Spokane, a place where porch lights and recycling bins were about the only things awake at that hour. I'd only made it 2 blocks when I started hearing the pulsing. At first, I thought it was coming from a house, maybe someone's bass-heavy music turned way down, but it wasn't directional. It wasn't loud either. Just a faint rhythmic thump, 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 like a heartbeat, but slower and wider somehow. I kept walking, waiting for it to disappear or line up with some familiar sound, but it didn't. It followed me, or maybe surrounded me. By the time I reached the park entrance, I realized the sound wasn't coming from ground level at all. It was overhead. I stopped walking and listened harder. The pulsing wasn't mechanical or electrical. It didn't vibrate through the ground. It was in the air above me, steady and strange. When I tilted my head back to look up, I wasn't expecting to see anything. Not really. The sky was clear, just a scattering of stars and the faint orange haze from the city. But then I saw the circle. A dim, pale light, maybe the size of a coin held at arm's length, moving in a slow, perfect loop above me. Not flickering, not changing shape, just circling with this unnatural precision. I couldn't tell how high it was, whether it was just above the rooftops or somewhere much further up, because it didn't illuminate anything around it. It didn't cast light, it was light. I stood there staring, mouth slightly open, for longer than I'd like to admit. The pulsing sound matched its movement. Each time it completed a loop, there was a slight swell in volume before it drifted softer again. It was subtle enough that I wondered if I was imagining the connection, but deep down it felt too synchronized to be coincidence. After a few rotations, the light slowed. The circle widened for a second, then contracted like something adjusting or shifting. Then the looping motion stopped completely, and the light hovered motionless. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't feel watched exactly. It was more like the air around me had thickened, or the night had become too quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Even the distant hum of traffic from the highway seemed muted. I took a step backward. The light responded immediately, not by moving toward me or away, but by drifting sideways, almost lazily, in the same direction I had moved. It wasn't following me. Not exactly. Just adjusting position like it was keeping me within some invisible zone. That was enough for my body to make the decision before my mind did. I turned and started walking home. Not running, walking. Too fast to be casual, too slow to be panic. My footsteps echoed slightly on the pavement, and for a few seconds I refused to look up again, convinced that if I did, the light would be directly overhead. But the pulsing kept going. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm felt closer now, vibrating lightly in my chest. When I finally forced myself to glance upward, the light was still above the street, drifting in a gentle diagonal path that matched my pace almost perfectly. It wasn't closing the distance, it wasn't leaving either, it was just there. I crossed onto Birchwood Drive, my street, and the light shifted again, subtly but enough that I noticed. Its path flattened out, the movement becoming more of a slow slide instead of a drift. The pulsing sound softened as if it were rising higher, even though the light didn't fade. I kept walking. My house was maybe 200 yards away. I tried to think logically, but every explanation broke apart the second I examined it. A drone couldn't move that smoothly or that quietly. A plane wouldn't hover. A balloon wouldn't create a pulsing sound or a perfect circular motion. And nothing man-made would adjust to me the way this thing seemed to. When I passed Mrs. Hartley's yard with the gaudy stone fountain that never worked, the pulsing suddenly stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The light froze in place above the street. It dimmed slightly like a dying ember and then began drifting upward. Not fast. Not slow. Just a steady vertical rise. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. I just kept my eyes on it as it climbed higher and higher, growing smaller until it was no brighter than the faintest star. And then it winked out completely. The instant it disappeared, the normal sounds of the night came rushing back. Crickets, a distant dog barking, the low hum of the transformer near the corner. I hadn't realized how quiet everything had gotten until the noise returned. My street felt like my street again, but I wasn't convinced the moment was over. When I reached my driveway, I stopped and looked back the way I had come. Nothing out of the ordinary, just trees, houses, calm air, everything exactly the way it always was. Inside the house, I locked the door immediately. Not something I usually did the second I walked in, but it felt necessary. The living room lights were still on from earlier, casting a warm, normal brightness across the walls. I stood there for maybe a full minute, listening to my heart gradually settle back into a natural rhythm. The strange thing was how normal everything looked, like the world outside had no memory of what just happened. Curiosity eventually pushed me to the window. I pulled the blinds back just enough to see the sky. Nothing, no movement, no dim circle of light, just stars and a faint haze from the city. But my eyes kept drifting to the exact patch of sky where the thing had disappeared. Even though it was empty now, I felt this strange tension, as if the air in that spot wasn't quite right. I didn't go back out for the rest of the night. I stayed awake on the couch until just after 4, when the sky started to lighten, watching the ceiling, the windows, the shadows, listening for anything that might hint at that pulsing starting again. Nothing did. It's been a while since then, and I've gone on late walks again, though nowhere near as often. Every time I step outside, I look up first, scanning the sky for that faint circle or any unusual movement. I try to tell myself I'm just being cautious, but part of me knows I'm waiting for something. Not fear exactly, but anticipation mixed with dread. And sometimes when I'm walking alone and the night goes just a little too quiet, I catch myself listening for that slow, deliberate pulse above me, wondering if it's still out there somewhere, circling until the moment it decides to drift back. I was stretched out on the hood of my old Subaru behind my cousin Jake's cabin in eastern Oregon, staring up at the sky the way I usually did when I visited. The property sits miles from anything, just dry fields, scattered pines, and a ridge line that blocks most of the little town's lights. It was late September, a cold, clear night. One of those nights where the stars feel sharp enough to cut you if you look too long. I'd gotten in earlier that afternoon and couldn't sleep, so I wandered out with a blanket and a thermos and just watched the sky. I wasn't expecting anything weird. I was mostly trying to tire myself out. The first strange thing was subtle. I noticed this cluster of stars, not a constellation I knew, just a small tight group near Cassiopeia, shift a little. Not twinkle or fade, actually shift, like something dark passed in front of them for a second. I thought maybe my eyes were tired or I'd blinked weird. I sat up, focused, waited. Everything looked normal again. A few minutes later, it happened again. Same cluster. This time, I was sure I hadn't blinked. They slid sideways, just barely, maybe the width of my thumb held at arm's length, and then snapped back into place like they were on strings someone had tugged. I lowered the thermos and listened. The night was quiet, too quiet for that time of year. Usually you hear insects buzzing, the dry grass popping, distant cows or something. But it was calm, like even the animals were trying not to draw attention to themselves. I told myself it was some kind of illusion. Temperature differences. Eye fatigue. Whatever. Still, I couldn't shake the weirdness of it. I ended up calling Jake even though he was already asleep. I just wanted someone else awake, even if I wasn't going to explain anything. His phone rang once and went straight to voicemail. Unusual, but not impossible. Service out here sucked. I put the phone back in my pocket and climbed off the hood. The stars didn't feel calm anymore. The whole sky felt aware, like I wasn't the one doing the watching. I started walking toward the field behind the cabin. There's a fence out there with a little metal gate that creaks no matter how you open it. When I reached it, I rested my hand on the cold bar and turned around to look at the sky again. The cluster shifted a third time, and this one wasn't subtle. It glided a short distance, smooth, controlled, and stopped. Not flickering, not fading, just repositioning itself like the whole section of sky had loosened. That was when I felt the pressure in the air. It came on fast, like standing next to a big speaker right before the bass hits. Not sound exactly, more like my chest tightened and my breathing went shallow. My ears felt like they wanted to pop but couldn't. I glanced around for wind or some kind of storm front, but the grass wasn't moving at all. Then everything near me, the fence, the trees, the dirt underfoot, seemed to hold its breath. No insects, no night breeze, no distant hum of anything human. The silence pressed in until the only sound left was my own pulse in my ears. I stepped back from the fence without meaning to. Overhead, the cluster of stars dimmed. Not all the way, just like a thin veil passed over them. The dark space between the stars looked wrong. Thicker. Like there was something there I couldn't quite see. I had this awful impression that whatever was blocking them wasn't at a distance. It felt close. Too close for anything in the sky should ever feel. I reached for my phone in reflex, maybe to take a picture. Maybe just to call someone, but when I pulled it out, the screen stayed black. It wasn't dead. The battery had been around 70%, but it wouldn't turn on. I held the power button, but nothing happened. That pressure in the air grew stronger, like it was settling around me. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't feel like danger exactly, but it felt intentional, which was almost worse. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything released. My ears popped. The pressure eased. A tiny breeze rustled across the grass, and the sounds of insects flickered back to life all at once, like someone had unmuted the world. The stars brightened to their original positions as if nothing had happened. The sky looked normal again. I tried my phone. It turned on instantly, like nothing was wrong. The time read 1:47 a.m., and I couldn't remember what it had been before the weirdness started. I hadn't looked. I walked back to the cabin slowly, turning around every few steps to check the sky. Everything stayed still. Ordinary. The chill was getting sharper, and the adrenaline had worn off enough that I was starting to feel stupid for being scared, even though the fear hadn't gone anywhere. When I got inside, I found the digital clock on the microwave blinking 12, like the power had flickered. But the cabin lights had been on when I came in. I checked the fridge display, same thing, reset. I looked over at the stove clock, flashing. All of them said 12. The power hadn't gone out. I would have noticed the lights cutting. I considered waking Jake, but decided against it. I didn't want to explain any of this half awake, and I didn't want him stepping outside and not seeing anything. I shut myself in the guest room and lay down fully dressed, just staring at the ceiling. Around 3:30, just when I was finally drifting off, I heard something outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like dry grass brushing against itself in a slow, steady pattern. A few swishes, then silence. A pause. Then another set. It sounded like someone walking without lifting their feet. I froze. The sound moved around the side of the cabin, then stopped underneath the guest room window. I didn't get up. I didn't want to look. I just held my breath and waited, every muscle locked. After a long moment, something extremely faint tapped the outer wall. Not a knock, more like a fingertip testing the surface. Then nothing. No footsteps leaving. No movement. Just nothing. I stayed awake until the first hint of sunrise pushed through the curtains, and when I finally checked outside, there were no footprints or disturbed patches of grass. The fence gate was closed. The field looked untouched. Jake didn't believe me when I told him the next morning. He laughed it off the way people do when they don't want to entertain strange possibilities. I didn't push it. I wasn't looking for someone to validate what I felt. I just needed to say it out loud. I left that afternoon instead of staying the weekend like I planned. The road home felt longer than usual. I kept glancing up at the sky, not looking for anything, just making sure everything stayed where it was supposed to be. It did. But every once in a while, I find myself searching for that same cluster of stars. And even when they look perfectly still, I can't shake the sense that something out there is capable of moving them, or at least making it look like they moved, and that I happened to be looking at the exact moment it did. I was awake later than I meant to be, sitting on my couch with the TV on mute and my laptop open but unused. It was one of those still, quiet nights where the house feels almost too calm. No wind, no traffic on my street, not even the usual barking from the neighbor's dog. Just this soft, heavy silence that made every little sound feel out of place. I remember glancing at the clock on the stove, 12:43 a.m., and thinking I should probably just go to bed. My house in Maple Ridge isn't big, just a small, one-story place I moved into after splitting up with my ex. I'd gotten used to living alone again, but nights like that always made the place feel bigger than it really was. I stood up to close the blinds in the living room when every electronic device in the house flickered. Not just the lights, everything. The TV screen flashed white for a second, the microwave clock reset, my laptop screen glowed brighter and then dimmed sharply, and even the tiny LED on my modem blinked like it was shorting out. And then the sky outside flashed. It wasn't bright like lightning. It was faint, more like someone held a huge, weak flashlight behind the clouds. It lit up the neighborhood for maybe half a second with no thunder afterward and no sound of any kind. Just a silent glow that came and went before I even understood what I was looking at. I froze next to the blinds for a few seconds. My house hummed softly, the way it does when the power first kicks back after an outage, but the electricity never actually went off. Everything just flickered. I checked my phone. No alerts, no outage notification. The Wi-Fi reconnected on its own after a moment. I felt this weird urge to step outside, even though I already didn't like how the air felt. Still and charged, like right before a storm. I opened the front door anyway. The street looked normal. All the houses were dark, except for a few porch lights. The sky overhead was mostly cloudy, but the clouds were low, thin, almost translucent in places. I could see a few stars poking through gaps. Nothing glowed now. Nothing looked unusual. I stepped off my porch and listened. The silence felt heavier outside. No insects, no distant cars, no rustling. Just a thick quiet that made me too aware of my own breathing. I walked to the end of my driveway and looked up again. The clouds drifted slowly across the sky, but in the center of them was a spot, just one, where the texture looked different. The clouds there seemed smoother, like they'd been smeared by a thumb. I stared at it, trying to decide if I was imagining it. As I watched, that smooth patch brightened. Not a lot, but enough to make the edges of it stand out from the rest of the sky. A pale, blurry glow coming from behind the clouds. It faded before I could blink. I waited to see if it would happen again. Nothing. When I turned to go back inside, I noticed the motion sensor light on my neighbor's garage was on. It usually only activates when someone walks right in front of it, but their driveway was empty. No raccoons, no wind, no movement at all. The light turned off while I was looking at it. I went back inside, shut the door, and locked it without thinking. The house felt colder now. I walked around checking things the way you do when something feels wrong, even though you can't explain why. I made sure the back door was locked, too, then returned to the living room. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was a weather app alert. No severe weather detected in your area. That was it. Just that one line. No explanation why it sent it. I tossed my phone down and tried to distract myself by watching something dumb online. But around 1:10, the TV screen flickered again. Not off, just this bright wash of static-like light across the bottom edge that lasted a second and then vanished. My laptop chimed at the same time, like it disconnected and reconnected to the power brick, even though I wasn't touching it. I sat perfectly still. My ears felt warm, like pressure was building inside my head. Not painful, just this dull inward push. And then everything went quiet again. The refrigerator clicked off. The HVAC fan died. Even the tiny hum of electricity running through the walls felt like it stopped. It wasn't a blackout, my lamp was still on, but the air lost that constant background sound you don't notice until it's gone. That was when I heard it. A soft, low tone outside. Not musical, not mechanical. More like a distant, steady resonance. Almost felt more than heard. I stepped toward the window slowly and parted the blinds just enough to look out. The street was empty, but the sky above the cul-de-sac looked wrong again. The clouds had a faint, bluish tint, subtle, like someone was shining a weak light through wet paper. The glow didn't pulse or move, it just held there, a dim color that didn't belong. I leaned closer to the glass, and as soon as I did, the glow faded. The normal cloud color returned instantly. The moment it disappeared, the background hum of the house snapped back. The fridge kicked on. The HVAC fan whooshed. The electronics all resumed their tiny vibrations. Everything felt normal again, almost aggressively normal. I backed away from the window and sat down on the couch, my heartbeat loud in the silence left behind. I didn't know if I should call someone. Who would I even call? I thought about texting my friend Katie, since she lived 2 blocks over. I unlocked my phone to send a message, but before I typed anything, the screen brightness dropped all the way down. Then it brightened, then dropped again. The slider moved on its own like someone was dragging it with invisible fingers. I locked the screen immediately, set the phone face down, and didn't touch it after that. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected the house to flicker again or that low tone to come back. Nothing else happened though. The night stayed quiet. When the sun finally came up, the house felt normal again. Almost boring. My devices worked fine. Even the microwave clock was accurate again, though I don't remember resetting it. Later that morning, while making coffee, I noticed something I missed during the night. The outdoor security light on my back porch was turned off at the switch. I never turn it off. It's always on the automatic setting. I flipped it back on without thinking. Then I realized something else. The switch wasn't just off. It was halfway between on and off, like it had been moved slowly and stopped there. I stood and stared at it for a long time. I haven't told anyone what happened. Not really. People joke about power flickers all the time, and weird lights in the sky don't usually mean anything. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I stop what I'm doing and just listen, waiting to see if everything goes quiet again, all at the exact same moment. So far, it hasn't, but I still check the sky every night before bed, just in case. I was sitting in my car next to an empty soybean field outside of Bellevue, Ohio, waiting for my friend Tyler to finish a late shift so we could grab food. It was one of those warm September nights where the air feels thick, like it's holding on to the whole day's heat. I had all the windows cracked, the engine off, and some quiet music playing through a little Bluetooth speaker because my stereo had been acting up. The road there isn't busy at night, just a 2-lane stretch cutting through farmland with maybe 1 car every 10 minutes. I wasn't tired, but I also wasn't fully alert. More like a comfortable daze where the dark feels soft and nothing seems urgent. That's when the red glow appeared. At first, I thought it was tail lights way down the road or maybe the plane beacon from the small crop duster airstrip a few miles out. But it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't high enough to be a tower or anything. It was low, like 20 feet above the tops of the soybeans, and just sitting there in the darkness, steady and soft, almost like a distant lantern. I leaned forward in my seat. The glow didn't pulse or flicker. It just held this muted red tone, the kind that should have cast some kind of reflection on the plants beneath it, but it didn't. The field stayed dark. Before I could make sense of it, the light slid sideways, smoothly. No rise or dip, just a straight horizontal glide over the crops, maybe 30 or 40 yards. Same brightness the whole time, like someone dragged a sticker across the sky. That movement sobered me instantly. I sat up straight and reached for my phone without taking my eyes off it, but the moment I touched the phone, the light vanished. Not faded, vanished. One frame it was there, the next it was gone, like someone switched off a screen. I stared at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. I checked my phone anyway. The screen didn't respond at first. I tapped it again and it lit up, but the brightness slider had moved almost all the way down. I never kept it that dim. When I tried to turn the brightness back up, the slider jumped around like the touchscreen wasn't reading my finger correctly. I locked it and set it aside, annoyed and uneasy at the same time. I turned off the speaker and listened. The field felt too quiet. I'd been out there enough nights to know what normal sounded like. Crickets, the occasional night bird, distant frogs. But for maybe 15 seconds, I heard nothing. Just dead, airless quiet. Then the insects started again, but not gradually. All at once, like someone hit play on the world. I got out of the car, even though part of me knew that wasn't smart. The warm air felt heavier than it had inside. Not humid, just heavy. I walked a few steps toward the field. The soybeans stretched out in neat rows, and the soil smelled like dust and old rain. Everything looked normal, but the atmosphere felt wrong, like the space around me didn't match what I was looking at. There was a faint vibration under my shoes, soft, irregular. I thought maybe it was a distant tractor or semi, but the road was silent. The vibration lasted maybe 2 seconds and then was gone. I told myself I was spooking myself over nothing. I went back to the driver's seat, shut the door, and tried to shake it off. Nothing else happened for a bit. I checked my watch. It was 10:41. Tyler wasn't supposed to get off until 11. I figured maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing from boredom and stale heat. Then my rearview mirror dimmed. The little auto-dim sensor kicked on, even though there were no headlights behind me. I glanced up and saw the mirror darken like a car was approaching, but the road in the reflection was empty. I tapped the glass. It brightened again. A few seconds later, the mirror dimmed once more. I twisted around in my seat. Still no car, no light source, just empty asphalt disappearing into the dark. I was debating whether to just drive into town and wait for Tyler somewhere with people when a soft sound came from outside the car. Not footsteps, not rustling. More like a single exhale, long and slow, drifting across the field. It wasn't loud, it was the opposite, like it was meant to be barely audible. It came from the direction where the glow had first appeared. I rolled the window all the way up, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. My car interior felt too small, too bright, too fragile. I shut off the dome light so I wouldn't be silhouetted inside. My hands were shaking a little, and I kept telling myself that if something had really been out there, I'd see it or hear it or feel something more obvious. Instead, the silence came back. Not complete, but muffled, as if the normal night sounds were being pushed away. Not muted entirely, just held at a distance. That's when the crops moved. A wave ran through them, not from wind, but from something passing through the rows. It wasn't fast or violent, just steady. A clean line of movement in a perfectly straight path. It was coming from the direction where the glow had gone. I couldn't see anything above the plants, no light, no silhouette, no animal shape. But whatever was making that path wasn't small. The rows parted in a wide, even section that stayed consistent as it moved. I started the car. I don't know how I wasn't already doing that. My fingers felt clumsy on the ignition, but the engine turned over on the first try. The movement in the field stopped, not slowed. Stopped. Every plant froze mid-sway, like whatever had been moving through them suddenly knew I'd noticed. I didn't wait to see if it started again. I reversed so fast the tires spat gravel, then turned onto the road without checking for anything. I drove back toward town, watching the mirrors constantly, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. The night looked normal again. Too normal. Halfway back, I finally got enough signal to text Tyler. I told him I'd meet him at the diner instead. He replied right away, "Cool, heading there now. Thought you were already here. Saw your lights by the field earlier." I hadn't turned my headlights on until I pulled onto the road. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd driven past around 10:30 and saw what looked like my car in the field turnout, but with these bright reddish lights shining on the crops. He said he figured I was messing with my new kit or taking photos with some kind of filter. I didn't answer until I got to the diner. When he saw my face, he didn't push. On the drive home later, he didn't say a word either, even when I kept checking the mirrors. The road was quiet and dark and perfectly normal again, but I avoided that route for months afterward, and even now, every time I see a field lit up by something, headlights, moonlight, anything, I feel myself waiting for that soft red glow to slide sideways just once before it disappears, like it was never there. I noticed the shimmer about an hour into the hike, somewhere past the second switchback where the trail narrowed and the trees grew taller and thinner. The morning had started cool and overcast, the kind of gray sky that makes everything feel muted. I wasn't expecting anything strange. I'd taken that trail in northern Vermont a dozen times before. It was my usual Saturday route, quiet, not too steep, just enough distance to clear my head. I remember thinking how empty it felt that morning. No other cars at the trailhead, no distant voices, even the birds sounded fewer than usual. I chalked it up to the weather and kept going. The strange thing started as this faint distortion in the air ahead of me. At first I assumed it was a patch of lingering fog or some weird trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't fog. It was like the kind of shimmer you see above hot pavement in the summer, except it was barely 50 degrees and the ground was still damp from overnight rain. It hung maybe 30 feet in front of me, suspended between two rows of spruce trees, a narrow column of warped space. It wasn't bright or colorful or dramatic, just off, like the forest behind it bent slightly in the wrong direction. I stopped walking without meaning to. The shimmer didn't move at first. It just hovered, vertical and still, the air around it faintly trembling. I thought maybe it was my eyes. I'd forgotten my contacts and was wearing an older pair of glasses. I even took them off and cleaned them with my shirt. Still there. I watched it for a good 10 seconds before it shifted. It drifted left, slow and smooth, threading itself between the trunks. The movement was too deliberate for a weather effect, too steady to be steam or fog. It didn't break or fade or change shape. It just glided sideways, like someone was dragging a transparent curtain across the trail. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. Not scared exactly, just this creeping awareness that something was wrong with the environment around me. I listened for people, for engines, for anything. The forest was dead quiet. Even the wind was still. All I could hear was my own breathing. I thought about turning around. Honestly, I should have, but the shimmer drifted deeper into the trees, toward a slope I'd hiked dozens of times, and curiosity kept me rooted. I stepped forward once, slow and careful. The leaf litter under me barely made a sound. The shimmer paused. It didn't turn or expand or react violently. It just stopped drifting the moment I moved, like it was noticing me. I froze again. After a few seconds, it resumed its movement, continuing in that same gentle glide until it disappeared behind a cluster of pines. I waited. Nothing came out the other side. I walked up to where it had been, half expecting the air to feel warm or cold or electrically charged. But it felt normal. Totally normal. I reached out a hand and waved it through nothing but regular forest air. For a while I convinced myself it had been fog after all, just fog behaving strangely. But as I continued up the trail, I couldn't shake the sense that something was following me. Not close, just present. The first sound came maybe 5 minutes later. This faint clicking noise, almost like two small stones tapping together. It echoed softly through the trees, not rhythmic, not loud. But the moment I stopped walking to listen, it stopped too. I strained to hear anything else, but the forest stayed silent. I started walking again. Another click. Farther ahead this time. I tried to tell myself it was a woodpecker or a squirrel dropping something, but the noise didn't match either of those. It was too sharp, too clean, like it came from something metallic. The trail curved, and when I rounded the bend, I caught another glimpse of the shimmer, just for a second. This time higher off the ground, maybe 10 feet up, drifting horizontally between branches. It looked slightly wider now, like a curtain stretched in a breeze I couldn't feel. The trees behind it blurred as it passed. I felt something cold sit in my stomach then. I backed up a step. The distortion paused again, exactly like before, as if responding to my movement. I held my breath, waiting to see what it would do. It slowly dimmed. Not faded like fog. Dimmed like someone was lowering the brightness of the air itself. The warped outline collapsed inward until it was just a faint ripple, then nothing. The forest snapped back into focus. I didn't hear anything for a long time. No clicks, no rustling, no distant hikers. The whole trail felt hollowed out, like the world had pulled back a little. I kept walking, slower now. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. Not quite fear, more like anticipation of something I didn't understand. The trail leveled out near a small clearing with a fallen log I usually sat on for a water break. When I reached it, I noticed the air felt heavier again, like pressure was building behind my ears. And then the clearing dimmed, not visibly, but perceptibly. The colors around me felt muted, the greens duller, the light flatter. I turned in a slow circle. That's when I saw the shimmer again. This time it wasn't a narrow column. It was wider, broad enough to cover half the clearing, a loose rectangle of distorted space floating maybe 6 feet above the ground. The trees behind it wavered like reflections in moving water. The edges fluttered, almost like it was breathing. For a moment, I actually thought the thing might drop toward me, but it didn't move at all. It just hovered, silent and steady and impossibly wrong. Then, from somewhere inside it, a low vibration pulsed outward. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure wave. It passed through my chest lightly enough that I questioned whether I'd imagined it. The shimmer flickered. A single blink, and dissolved. The clearing brightened. The pressure left my ears. The forest sounds returned in one sudden sweep. Birds chirping, distant crunches, the faint whisper of wind finally moving through the branches. The shift was so abrupt it made me dizzy. I sat on the fallen log with my hands braced on my knees, breathing shallowly. I felt watched, but not in a malicious way. More like the way you feel when someone stares at you from across a room, trying to understand you. I stayed there longer than I meant to. When I finally headed back down the trail, the forest felt normal again. Completely normal. Too normal. Nothing else happened on the hike down, but the whole walk I kept glancing between the trees, half expecting that distortion to reappear. It didn't. When I reached the parking lot, there was one other car that hadn't been there earlier, a silver sedan with its windows up and no one inside. It looked empty, too empty. I hurried to my own car and left without looking back. I've returned to that trail a few times since, but I've never seen the shimmer again. Everything looks ordinary, like it always did, but every time I walk past the stretch where it first appeared, I catch myself slowing down, scanning the air for even the slightest ripple, just in case it's still somewhere between the trees, waiting for me to notice it again. I was driving back from my cousin Evan's place in rural Pennsylvania, taking the long stretch of Route 219 that cuts through nothing but farmland and rolling hills. It was close to midnight, and the weather had done that quick spring shift from warm to chilly. A light mist clung to the edges of the fields, making everything look washed out and dull. I wasn't tired exactly, but the road had that hypnotic feel to it. Dark pavement, faint lane reflectors, the occasional farmhouse light way off in the distance. My car's radio was down low, playing some old alt-rock station with too much static even on good nights. I remember the moment the signal cut. Not faded, cut. 1 second there was music, the next there was a burst of static so sharp it made me flinch. Then the static steadied into a clean, perfectly even tone. Not loud, but focused, like it was coming from inside the dash rather than the speakers. I tapped the radio screen, but it didn't respond. None of the buttons did. The tone just kept playing. A few seconds later, the dashboard lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to feel wrong. Like the power was being siphoned for something else. That's when I noticed the light in the rearview mirror. At first, I assumed it was a car cresting a hill far behind me. But it didn't behave like headlights. It didn't bounce with the road, didn't brighten or fade, just hovered at a distance, perfectly smooth and steady. A single white glow, too high above the road to be another vehicle. I kept glancing back and forth between the road ahead and the mirror, waiting for it to resolve into something normal. But the more I watched, the clearer it was that the light wasn't gaining on me. It wasn't falling back either. It was following. I eased off the gas. The tone from the radio stayed constant. My speed dropped from 57 to around 40, and still the light in the mirror matched me exactly, neither drawing closer nor drifting away. I don't know why I didn't pull over right then. Part of me thought it had to be something explainable. Maybe a tower light reflecting weirdly, or a plane lined up just right with the road. But it didn't look like anything I'd seen in the sky at night. It had no halo, no flicker, no blinking, just this clean, pale glow. The road curved gently left, passing a field of tall grass. I watched to see if the light would shift or angle differently as I turned. It didn't. It stayed centered in the mirror, like it wasn't in the sky at all, but directly tied to my movement. My heart started racing. I turned the radio off entirely, even though the screen showed the power icon as off already. The tone didn't stop. It didn't change pitch or volume, but I started feeling it in my chest a little, a soft vibration behind the sternum. I rolled down the window to see if it was coming from outside. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp, but the tone stayed exactly the same. I drove like that for maybe another minute, watching the light in the mirror until something shifted. The tone went silent, just cut out the same way it started. At that exact moment, the light in the mirror brightened. Not dramatically, but enough that I gasped and instinctively tapped the brakes. My headlights washed over the pavement as I slowed, and for one sickening second I thought the light behind me was descending. It wasn't. It was rising. Not fast, not in a straight line, more like drifting upward at an angle, following an invisible path. It still looked small, but that might have been distance more than size. It lifted through a thin patch of cloud, and the cloud lit up faintly around it like a lamp behind a sheet. Then it emerged above the cloud layer and paused, dead still. I stared at it through the mirror, then through the windshield as I craned my neck upward. It hung high above the road, motionless, a little brighter than before, but still just a white speck of light. I sat there in the middle of the empty highway, foot on the brake, engine idling, watching it do nothing. Then it blinked, not like an aircraft beacon. Not rhythmic, just one single blink, fast enough to question whether I'd imagined it. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield. The light blinked again. Same quick flash, same perfect stillness afterward. I didn't want to stay there any longer. I eased the car forward and kept my eyes mostly on the road, but every few seconds I checked the sky through the top edge of the windshield. The light stayed exactly where it was. I drove for maybe 3 miles before it happened again. The dashboard lights dimmed, just a flicker, like a quick power sag. The radio screen flashed white and then black, even though the system was off. The air felt thick for a moment, like humidity without warmth. I looked up. The light was gone. Not drifted away, not faded. Gone. The sky where it had been was empty, just patchy clouds and a few scattered stars. I checked the mirror, checked again, rolled the windows down and listened. Nothing. Not even distant highway noise. Just the soft hum of my engine and the wind brushing the open window. I sped up, not to escape anything specific, but because the silence made me nervous. The radio finally reset itself after a few minutes and switched back to the same weak alt-rock station like nothing had happened. When I reached town, the normal streetlights felt almost too bright. I remember sitting in the driveway for a minute before going inside, watching the sky like I might catch even a hint of that pale glow again. I didn't. But later that night, around 2 a.m., when I woke up hungry and went to the kitchen, I saw something strange reflected in the sliding glass door. Not outside, in the glass itself. A faint white flicker behind me, like the light from earlier but smaller, weaker. I spun around instantly. Nothing there. No cars, no planes, no glow. I didn't sleep much after that, and even now, weeks later, whenever I'm driving alone at night and the radio makes the slightest crackle, I catch myself checking the mirror, just to make sure the sky behind me is still empty. So far it has been, but I still listen for that tone, and I still look for that light. I woke up exactly at 3:11 a.m., not because of a noise or a dream, but because I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that someone had been standing in my room. Not was standing there. Had been. Like that sensation when someone leaves a space a second before you walk into it and the air hasn't settled yet. I didn't bolt upright or anything. I just lay there, eyes open in the dark, trying to understand what felt off. The house was completely quiet. My place sits on the edge of a small town in Maine. 2 bedrooms, old wooden floors that creak if you breathe too hard. Normally, if my cat walks across the hallway, I hear it. But the house was absolutely still. I don't know how long I lay like that before I reached over and checked my phone. 3:11. No notifications. No alerts. Just that time glowing back at me in a way that made the silence feel heavier. My eyes adjusted enough to make out the shapes of the furniture. Everything looked normal. The chair in the corner, the dresser, the open doorway leading to the hall. I didn't see anything or anyone, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat behind my ribs, tight and certain. Someone was here. I sat up slowly. The sheets felt cool, the air in the room even cooler against my arms. I looked around again, this time more carefully. That's when I noticed the window. It's an old double-hung window facing the backyard, the kind with glass that rattles slightly when the wind hits it right. Except there was no wind that night. The trees outside were still. The sky had been cloudy earlier, and the street lamp glow normally seeped through, but now the glass looked darker than usual. I reached out and touched it. The glass was warm, not hot, not like a heater, just gently warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, which made no sense, obviously. I kept my hand on it a moment, confused. The warmth was strongest near the center and faded toward the edges. I even touched the wooden frame to compare, and the frame was cold like everything else in the room. I remember whispering out loud, "What the hell?" But even my voice sounded wrong, too loud in the quiet. I pulled the blinds up a few inches and peered into the backyard. Nothing was moving. My yard is small, fenced on two sides, with a patch of grass that never grows right and an old maple tree that leans too much. The security light from the neighbor's garage cast just enough glow to make everything seem washed out. No animals, no footprints, no fog, no shadows, just a still, ordinary backyard. But the glass was warm. I let the blinds drop and stepped back. A faint hum vibrated through my ears for a second, not in the room, but inside my head, like the leftover ringing after hearing something loud, except I hadn't heard anything. I walked into the hallway, half expecting to hear floorboards shifting or something brushing against the walls. Nothing. The house felt empty in a way I'd never noticed before. In the kitchen, the digital clock on the stove was off. The microwave, too. Both had reset, blinking 12, even though the rest of the power seemed fine. The fridge was humming. The overhead light worked when I flipped it on. My phone still had service. Only those two appliances had restarted. Power flickers aren't unusual around here, especially after storms, but the weather had been calm all night. No rain, no wind, no thunder. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air outside felt wrong. Not cold, not warm, but thin. That's the only word I can think of. Like the space around me had been stretched a little too far. The sky was overcast, but the clouds seemed lower than usual, like a ceiling I could almost reach. And the silence wasn't just quiet, it was vacant. No insects, no distant cars on the main road, no rustling branches. Then a sound came from above me, a soft, fading whoosh. Not mechanical, not wind, more like something exhaling as it moved away. I tilted my head back instinctively, but the clouds hid everything. I stood there waiting, listening, trying to figure out where the sound had gone. It didn't repeat, it didn't come closer. It was just gone, leaving only static silence behind. I stayed outside longer than I should have, staring at the sky like an answer might appear. Eventually the silence got to me. I stepped back into the house and locked the door, even though I knew a lock wouldn't matter if whatever had warmed the glass had actually been inside. Back in the bedroom, the window had cooled down. I checked with my hand. Completely normal temperature. I sat on the edge of the bed, too awake to try sleeping again. My cat, Milo, usually sleeps at my feet, but that night he was hiding under the bed, pressed so far into the corner I could barely reach him. When I called his name softly, he didn't come out. His eyes were wide, pupils huge. Around 4 a.m., the normal sounds of the house started up again. A breeze rattled the eaves. A distant car passed down the hill. Milo crawled out from under the bed and acted like nothing had happened. By the time the sun came up, I started questioning myself. Maybe I'd dreamed most of it. Maybe the power really did flicker and I imagined the rest. Maybe the warm glass was just temperature difference somehow. But then I walked past the window again. There were faint smudge marks on the inside of the glass. Not fingerprints. Long, curved streaks, like something had pressed lightly against it and dragged downward. Too broad for hands, too smooth for fabric. I wiped them off without thinking, then immediately regretted doing it. Nothing strange happened the rest of the day. Nothing the next night either. I kept checking the window, but the glass stayed cold, ordinary, forgettable. It's been weeks now, and life has mostly returned to normal. But sometimes when I'm half asleep and roll over in the dark, I get that same sudden certainty that someone was standing in the room watching me breathe. And every time that happens, I reach for the window glass, just to make sure it's still cold. I was out at Lake Marin the night it happened, sitting alone on the rotten little dock with a cooler, a folding chair, and the same beat-up rod I'd been using since high school. It was early September, the kind of dusk where the heat from the day finally eases off and the air smells like wet leaves. I'd worked a double shift at the hardware store, and fishing was the only thing that ever helped me unwind anymore. There wasn't anyone else around. The lake's on the edge of a tiny town in northern Wisconsin, surrounded by thick trees and a few old cabins. Most people had packed up for the season already. I liked it quiet. I liked hearing the occasional splash from a carp or the far-off hum of someone's ATV heading back through the woods. I'd been out there maybe an hour when I noticed the first strange thing. My line went slack, not from a bite, but like the water itself had settled suddenly. The ripples around the dock smoothed out. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured the wind died down. But then the insects stopped buzzing. 1 second they were everywhere, buzzing around my ears, and the next it was silent enough that I could hear the chair creak when I shifted my weight. I sat there, rod in hand, not moving, trying to figure out why everything went so still. No wind, no insects, no water movement. Just a weird held breath feeling over the lake. Then I saw the light. It started maybe 30 feet out from the dock, just under the surface. A soft white glow, round and steady, like someone had lowered a lantern into the lake. Except it moved in a perfectly smooth line, gliding beneath the water as if the drag didn't affect it at all. Fish can glow from reflection, boats have lights, even people can shine flashlights under the water, but none of those move like this. It didn't sway or ripple or flicker. It looked like it was being pulled on a track. I leaned forward slowly, the boards under me groaning way too loudly in the sudden quiet. The light drifted closer, but not directly at me, more like it was tracing the shoreline. I watched it move with this steady, unnatural calm cutting through complete stillness. I remember thinking, maybe it's a diver, but Lake Marin is shallow near the shore, barely 6 feet deep, and the glow wasn't the shape of a flashlight beam. There was no cone, no direction, just a round, self-contained orb of white. The insects started again for a second, just a quick burst of normal sound, then cut out all at once, like someone flipping a switch. I felt this tightness in my chest, like the air pressure had changed. Not painful, just noticeable. Uncomfortable, like sitting in a plane right before it takes off. The light drifted closer, maybe 20 feet now. I could see the water above it clearly, undisturbed. No bubbles, no wake. It was like the lake didn't know something was passing through it. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The moment I spoke, the glowing orb paused. Not stopped with momentum or drift. Paused. Frozen in place like it heard me. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed for a few seconds. Then the light started to sink, straight down, same smooth speed, disappearing deeper and deeper until the glow dimmed to a faint blur. It didn't flicker out or fade in patches, just shrank evenly, like it was dropping away into a bottomless pit. Lake Marin is only about 40 feet deep at the center, but the glow kept sinking long past where it should have hit the lake bed. The dim white dot slid down into the dark until it vanished completely. The instant it disappeared, the insects started buzzing again. A frog croaked near the reeds. A breeze rolled across the dock, making my shirt flutter. It was like the lake exhaled. I sat there gripping my fishing rod so tight my hand hurt. The whole thing had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt longer. I kept staring at the spot where the light had vanished, waiting for it to come back up. It didn't. I tried to fish again for a while, telling myself it had to be something normal, something explainable. But every little splash made me jerk my head. Every ripple felt suspicious. At one point, a loon called from across the lake, and I nearly dropped the rod. After about 20 more minutes, I decided to pack up. I told myself I was tired, that I wasn't scared, but my hands were shaking when I folded the chair. My cooler tipped over while I was loading it into the truck bed, and I left half the drinks rolling around on the dock because I didn't want to kneel near the water again. Driving home, the silence inside the cab felt heavy. The truck headlights cut through patches of fog drifting across the road. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror even though there was nothing behind me but trees. At one point, the radio crackled, a single burst of static like someone brushed the antenna, but the station didn't change, and the music kept playing. When I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light didn't come on. It always does, even for raccoons or moths. I stood there holding my gear, staring at the dark yard, waiting for the sensor to wake up. When it finally flicked on, it did so slowly, like it was warming up. Inside the house, everything looked normal. My dog, Jasper, didn't greet me like he usually does. He just stood in the hallway staring at the back door, ears up, tail stiff. When I tried to call him over, he hesitated before walking toward me, like he wasn't sure I was really me. That part bothered me more than the lake. I took a shower just to have some noise around me. The hot water helped a little, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smooth white orb cutting through the dark water, moving like it wasn't part of the lake at all. Later that night, right before I fell asleep, I thought I heard a faint humming. So quiet I wasn't even sure it was real. It came from somewhere outside, lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then stopped. Jasper's head lifted and he looked toward the window, ears perked, but he didn't bark. I wanted to get up and check, but I didn't. In the morning, I told myself I imagined most of it. But when I drove past the lake on my way to work, I slowed down and looked out across the water. The surface was perfectly calm, reflecting the trees like a mirror. Nothing unusual. Nothing glowing. Still, I haven't been back to fish there since. I keep thinking about the way the light paused, how it moved like it had intention, like it was following something or listening or looking. And the worst part is, every night since then, when the house gets quiet, Jasper sleeps with his back against my bedroom door instead of at the foot of the bed. He never did that before. I was sitting on the back porch when it happened, drinking a lukewarm ginger ale and trying to cool off after a long day hauling lumber. Late August in eastern Tennessee doesn't really cool off at night, but the humidity drops just enough to make it bearable. My place sits on the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by hickory and pine. The porch faces west, but the moon was high enough that night to light up most of the yard. I wasn't doing anything special, just resting, listening to the cicadas, enjoying the quiet before heading in. My neighbor, an older guy named Ron, usually kept a light on at his place about 200 yards through the trees, but that night his windows were dark. It made the whole ridge feel emptier than usual. I leaned back in the old rocking chair and looked up at the sky. The moon was almost full, bright enough that the treetops had this pale outline around them. I remember noticing how still everything felt. Even the cicadas seemed softer than usual. Not silent, just distant. That's when I saw it. Something glided across the face of the moon, slow, smooth, and completely silent. At first I thought it might be an owl or a heron, but the shape was wrong. It wasn't flapping, it wasn't gliding on wings. It just moved, a perfect silhouette drifting on a straight path. I sat forward, squinting, trying to make out details, but it had no edges I could parse. No feathers, no body shape, just a dark form sliding across the light. I waited for the cicadas to bounce back after it passed, the way they sometimes do after a sudden noise, but the sound stayed muted. The object kept going until it slipped beyond the moon's glow and vanished into the dark sky. I kept staring at the spot where it disappeared, trying to convince myself it was some kind of bird at a weird angle. But I've lived here most of my life. I know the birds around this ridge. This wasn't like anything I'd seen. I should have gone inside then, but instead I grabbed the railing and stood there, listening. The air felt heavy, thicker than it had any right to be. I took a few steps out into the yard, expecting to hear the usual summer sounds, cicadas, frogs, distant trucks on the highway, but everything was off. Quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like the whole ridge was holding still. I walked a little farther into the clearing. The moon felt too bright, this almost clinical, lighting up every blade of grass. I kept glancing upward, half expecting the silhouette to cross again, but the sky above looked normal. Then something passed in front of the stars. I didn't see a shape that time, Just the stars blink out in a smooth line like something wide and dark moved over them. Not fast, just steady and silent. It slid across maybe 5 or 6 stars before the pattern reappeared as if nothing had happened. The cicadas stopped completely. I stood there frozen, staring up at this one patch of sky. For a second, nothing moved. No wind, no insects. My own breathing sounded weirdly loud in my ears. Then the air pressure changed. It wasn't dramatic, no pop or ringing, just a soft shift like when an elevator starts moving, a gentle drop in my stomach. The hairs on my arms lifted. The whole clearing felt charged, even though the sky was clear and there wasn't a hint of a storm coming. I stepped back toward the porch, not running, but not taking my time either. Halfway there, I felt a vibration, not through the ground, but through my chest. A low, steady hum that didn't come from any direction. It just existed around me. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then faded. Right after the hum stopped, a faint breeze brushed past me, just one brief sweep across the yard, rustling the grass. And then, just like that, the cicadas started up again, loud enough to feel normal. I stood on the porch steps for a long time, listening, watching the sky. Everything looked exactly as it should. The moon was bright and motionless. No silhouettes, no shifting stars, nothing unusual. The air loosened up, the humidity settled back in, and it felt like the night had reset. I went inside eventually, locked the door, even though I don't usually bother, and sat at the kitchen table without turning on any lights. My dog, Maggie, trotted over and sat next to me, but she kept glancing toward the back door like she heard something outside. She wasn't tense or growling, just alert in a way I'd never seen from her. She stayed close to me the entire night. When I finally tried to sleep, I kept waking up for no reason. Not startled, just aware, like something nudged me back to consciousness. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and checked the porch again. Nothing. Trees still. Yard empty. But the air felt slightly warm, like someone had been standing out there a minute earlier. The next day at work, I tried to bring it up casually with Tom, one of the guys in the lumber yard. I said, I thought I saw a weird bird last night. He shrugged and said he'd heard something strange himself around midnight. Said his security lights flickered twice, even though they'd never done that before. I wanted to ask more, but someone called him over to help with a delivery, and the moment passed. That night, I hoped everything would feel normal again. I didn't sit outside, but I did peek through the blinds a few times. The moon wasn't as bright, and the yard was just the yard. But around 11, Maggie lifted her head and stared at the ceiling. Not barking, not growling, just staring. I listened for something, footsteps, creaking, wind, but there was nothing. After a minute, she settled down again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved overhead. It's been a couple of weeks now. Nothing else has happened. But every night when the moon is out, I find myself checking it without meaning to. Watching for that shape, that impossible slow glide, listening for the hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I keep telling myself it was some strange bird, a trick of the light, a drifting cloud, anything normal. But the part I can't explain, even to myself, is how quiet the world got while it was happening. Like everything around me paused to let something pass by, and how whatever it was moved like it didn't have to obey the rules the rest of us do. I was walking home from the bus stop after my late shift. The kind of slow walk you do when you're too tired to hurry, but not tired enough to sit down. It was close to midnight, cool for early October, with that crisp air that makes sounds carry a little farther than they should. My apartment was about 8 blocks from the stop, through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Kent, Washington. Most of the houses were dark, a few porch lights still on, everything normal, at least at first. The first weird thing happened before I even reached the second block. I noticed the streetlight ahead of me dim just a bit, not flicker, just a drop in brightness, like someone turned a knob down for half a second. I didn't think much about it. These lights were old and buzzed constantly, so a little dimming didn't seem surprising. But then the next one dimmed too when I got close, and the next. I slowed down, trying not to overthink it. Maybe there was some power thing going on. Maybe the grid was shifting load. Stuff like that happens. But it kept happening in the same way, each streetlight slightly lowering its brightness as I passed underneath it, then going back to normal once I walked on. I stopped under one and looked straight up at it. It hummed softly, the same as it always did. Nothing unusual. I waited a moment, nothing changed. But when I took another step forward, the next light down the street dimmed. Just that one. Just as I moved, I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, a timing thing. Maybe I hadn't walked home this late enough to notice how the lights behaved. But my chest felt tight in a way that didn't line up with any reasonable explanation. About halfway home, I noticed the neighborhood was quieter than normal. Usually, you'd hear at least a dog barking somewhere, or a TV muffled through a window, or traffic from the main road. But everything felt dampened. Not silent, just muted, like someone had put a blanket over the world. A block later, I heard something like a soft electrical hum. It wasn't coming from the streetlights. They had their own distinct buzz I'd learned to ignore. This was deeper, steadier, and it didn't seem to come from any direction. It just hung in the air. I tried to pinpoint it, turning my head, but the hum stayed the same, no matter where I faced. I hadn't seen anyone since getting off the bus. No cars passed, no one walking their dog. It was just me on the sidewalk and this strange tension in the air. I checked my phone, even though I wasn't expecting anything. The screen brightness looked off, dimmer than usual somehow, even at max. A weird brownish tint clung to the edges, but when I blinked it looked normal again. The battery icon flickered once. Then everything steadied. That's when I realized the street light 2 blocks ahead had already dimmed, even though I wasn't anywhere near it yet. I froze. My breath felt trapped in my throat. The light stayed dim for maybe 2 seconds, then returned to full brightness. I kept walking because I didn't know what else to do. My apartment wasn't far now. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets, trying to look normal, like nothing was bothering me. But every step made me feel more exposed. The streetlights continued their strange behavior, either dimming as I approached, or now, dimming before I even got close, like something else was moving along the street ahead of me. I didn't hear anything new. No footsteps, no car engine, just the steady low hum in the air. When I reached the long straight stretch with no cross streets, the sky over the neighborhood caught my attention. At first I thought it was just a cloud drifting across, but the shape wasn't right. It was too uniform, too smooth. A faint glow, pale, almost bluish, moved across the sky, slow and steady. It didn't light up the rooftops or the ground. It didn't cast any shadows. It was just there. Passing overhead with this disconnected calmness that made my skin crawl. I stopped walking again. The glow moved straight across my field of vision. Not bright, not fast, just deliberate. The kind of motion that makes you realize you don't have a category to put it in. As it passed overhead, the hum around me seemed to thicken. Not louder, just more noticeable, like it was inside my chest instead of around me. Then the glow faded behind a thin stretch of clouds and disappeared entirely. No gradual dimming, no drift into distance, just gone. Right after it vanished, the streetlight nearest me snapped back to full brightness in a way I felt more than saw. 1 second dim, next second sharper, almost harsh. The other streetlights along the block brightened too, all at once, as if someone had turned the neighborhood back on. And the hum stopped. Not faded, stopped. The sudden return of normal nighttime sounds almost startled me. A dog barked somewhere. A car passed on the main road. A vent fan clicked on from a nearby house. Everything felt too loud, even though it was all everyday stuff. I forced myself to keep walking, even though every instinct told me to stay still. My keys felt slippery in my palm as I tightened my grip on them. I tried not to look up again, but my eyes kept flicking toward the sky, searching for the glow. There was nothing now, just stars and a thin strip of cloud. I reached my apartment building a few minutes later. The front porch light didn't dim when I stepped beneath it. The hallway lights inside didn't flicker. Everything seemed normal. But when I locked my door behind me, I realized my hands were shaking. I sat on the couch for a while without turning on the TV or any music, listening to the familiar hum of the fridge, the occasional thump from the upstairs neighbor. All the normal background noise I'd never paid attention to suddenly felt grounding, safe. I didn't see anything else that night. Nothing strange happened the next day either. I even walked the same route again just to prove to myself that the lights wouldn't dim like that. They didn't. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm coming home from a shift, I'll catch myself checking the sky for that faint glow, half expecting the streetlights to respond to something I can't see. I was driving back from my friend Mason's place in eastern Colorado, taking Highway 24 the long way home because I wanted some quiet. It was one of those late summer nights where the air still holds a little heat, but the sky looks crisp enough to see every star. The stretch between Limon and Calhoun is pretty empty, just open fields and the occasional cluster of farm lights way off in the distance. No traffic, no houses close to the road. I liked it that way. About 20 minutes into the drive, something in the engine hesitated. Not a stall, just a quick jolt, like the car lost power for a beat. The radio didn't cut out. The dashboard lights didn't blink. It was more like the entire car went weightless for 1 second and then dropped back into itself. As soon as that happened, I saw a pale light above the highway. I don't mean a bright beam or something dramatic. This was more like a faint, cold glow, almost the same color as the moon, but without a source you could pinpoint. It hovered way up, maybe a couple 100 feet above the road, a little ahead of me, not moving fast, not flickering, just there, like it was waiting. I eased off the gas. The car felt fine again, but the glow stayed in place as I got closer. I could tell now that it wasn't connected to anything. There was no structure, no pole, no aircraft shape around it. It wasn't a plane or a drone, not unless someone invented a way for light to float without anything holding it. I drove under it. As I passed directly beneath, the glow dimmed just a little, almost like it reacted to me. My windshield reflected a soft shimmer I couldn't explain. I checked my mirrors, and the glow didn't stay behind me. It drifted sideways, sliding away from the road without changing brightness. I kept driving. I probably should have stopped or turned around, or done something besides stare like an idiot. But being alone on a dark highway with something like that nearby made stopping feel like the worst possible choice. For a few minutes, everything went quiet again. The car ran smoothly. The radio played low. Fields rolled by in the dark. I told myself it might have been some kind of weather thing, light refracting off moisture or dust. But the sky was clear. There was no haze, no clouds, nothing. I was still thinking about it when the second strange thing happened. The radio fizzled, just for a half second, like someone crumpled a foil wrapper next to the speakers. The station didn't change, and the music didn't drop out completely. It just warped. Right as that happened, the dashboard clock blinked. Not reset, not dim, just blinked once. And I felt the car hesitate again. Same soft jolt as before. I looked out the windshield, and there it was, another pale glow ahead of me. Or maybe the same one. It was hard to tell. This one sat lower than the last, not directly above the road, but off to the right over a field. It moved slow, steady, almost like it was pacing me from a distance. I checked my speed. I was going maybe 55, normal for that road at night. The glow matched me without any visible movement. It didn't bob or drift. It stayed on the same horizontal plane, like it followed rules I couldn't see. Every few seconds it brightened, then softened again, not pulsing, more like it breathed. I rolled down the window to listen. The night air rushed in, warm and dry. Crickets, wind through grass, distant hum of the tire on pavement, normal sounds. Nothing like an engine overhead, nothing mechanical, but behind those normal sounds was something else, a faint vibration, almost below hearing. More like pressure. I felt it in my jaw before I noticed it in my ears. The same kind of feeling you get when you're about to drive into a tunnel or gain altitude too fast, except this was flat open land and the air was perfectly still. When I looked back to the glow, it had stopped moving. It froze in the air, brightness holding steady. I passed it, and as soon as it slipped out of my peripheral vision, the pressure in my ears faded. I sped up a little, not enough to be obvious, just enough that I felt like I was putting distance between us. The road was straight for another few miles before bending toward town. I kept watching the fields to my right where the glow had hovered, but everything was dark again, normal again. Maybe 2 minutes later, a truck came toward me in the opposite lane. When its headlights passed mine, my interior lights flickered. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. The faint hum deep in my chest returned for one brief moment, and then the truck was gone, and the air was normal again. As I approached the curve, I realized something else was off. The sky above the fields to my left looked wrong. Not glowing, not bright, just wrong. Like the stars in that patch were smeared or blurred, the way heat rising off asphalt makes distant objects waver, except it wasn't hot out, and the blur was too high, maybe 40 or 50 feet above the crops. The blur drifted, slow and smooth, the way a shadow would drift if the thing casting it moved silently overhead. Except there was nothing there. No shape, no outline, just the distortion. I slowed down almost to a crawl. The blur passed across the road maybe 20 yards in front of me. Not blocking it, just hanging over the asphalt for a few seconds. I couldn't see anything inside it. It was just a soft patch of warped air. Then it slid upward and dissolved into nothing. The pale glow never reappeared. I drove the rest of the way home with both hands locked on the wheel. Every time my engine shifted tone or the wind hit the car wrong, my heart kicked up. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light looked too bright, as if my eyes hadn't fully adjusted back to normal reality yet. Inside the house, everything was fine. The clock on the microwave matched my dashboard. My phone worked, no weird sounds, no strange shadows. I stood at the window for a long time, though, looking out at the sky above the trees, half expecting that dim white glow to drift into view again. It didn't. But for weeks afterward, whenever I drove that same stretch of highway at night, even at different times, even on different days, I found myself waiting for that soft jolt in the engine, that blink of the dashboard, that pale light hovering just ahead, like it already knew where I was going. The storm came in earlier than the forecast said it would. I was staying at my cousin Riley's cabin near Lake Honeywell, helping him replace some siding and trim that had rotted out. He'd gone back to Denver for a couple days, leaving me there alone to finish up the last stretch of work before the rain made everything worse. By the time the clouds rolled over the ridge, I'd already packed my tools in the shed and was sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the sky turn purple. It wasn't a heavy storm at first, just wind and scattered drops that felt colder than they should have for late July. The air smelled electric. The lake was flat, not a ripple on it, even though the treetops were shaking. That contrast bothered me for some reason. The surface of the water looked too smooth, almost like it was holding its breath. The first flash of lightning lit up the entire sky. In that half second of brightness, I saw something behind the clouds. Not a plane, not a bird, something big and round, like the edge of a metallic disc just barely showing through. I didn't catch much detail. It was more like an outline, a rim, a curve of something solid that shouldn't have been there. I remember holding my breath without meaning to. The thunder followed a few seconds later, low and stretched out, the kind that rumbles through your chest. I kept staring at the spot where I'd seen it, telling myself it was probably just a weird shadow or some trick of the light bouncing off the storm front. Then the second flash came, and there was nothing, just clouds. Thick, dark, heavy clouds moving east. I thought maybe I blinked, or maybe the angle changed, or maybe the first flash had hit the underside of the cloud in some weird way. But something about it stuck with me. The shape had been too clean, too definite. I stayed on the porch longer than I meant to, watching the storm turn into a full downpour. Rain hammered the deck boards. The wind pushed sheets of water sideways. The trees swayed hard enough that I expected one to snap. But the lake stayed smooth. That was the thing that kept bothering me, even more than what I thought I saw. No waves, no choppy surface, just a flat, dark plate of water reflecting the occasional lightning. I decided to go inside when the wind started throwing pine needles into my hair. The cabin wasn't much. Small living room, old stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, Riley never bothered replacing, but it felt safer than being outside. I shut the door, latched it out of habit, and went to close the blinds. Another flash lit up the sky. This time, the reflection came from the lake, not the clouds. A wide, white arc. It didn't match the shape of the clouds or the direction of the lightning. It looked like something curved was shining back at me from under the storm. The thunder hit almost immediately, loud enough that one of the picture frames on the wall rattled. I stepped away from the window. I couldn't explain why, but I felt exposed standing there, like whatever I'd seen might be able to see me too. I told myself I was being stupid. I'd been alone too long, doing too much work, staying up too late. I tried to shake it off. The cabin lights flickered. Not off, just a quick dip in brightness. Then again, then steady. I checked my phone even though I knew the service was bad out there. No notifications, no emergency alerts, nothing. When I looked back out the window, the lake still hadn't moved. That's when I heard the first sound that didn't belong to the storm. A low hum. Not loud, but heavy. A vibration more than a noise. It came from somewhere above the roofline, maybe higher. It didn't match the thunder, didn't sync with the wind. It felt separate, intentional. I pressed my ear to the wall. The hum slid lower, almost into silence, then rose again so faintly I wondered if I imagined it. Then the lights flickered a third time, longer than before. I stepped away from the window and turned off the overhead lamp. If something was happening outside, if something was moving, I didn't want to be the only bright thing in the open. The storm kept flashing every few seconds anyway, giving me just enough light to see the outlines of the furniture. The next flash lit up the entire ridge across the lake. Something was above it. High up, behind the thickest part of the cloud shelf, there was a round, smooth shape that caught the lightning like metal. Not bright, not reflective, just enough to show its curve. This time, I saw more of it. Not the whole thing, but enough to know it was big, bigger than any aircraft I'd ever seen, and silent. Completely silent except for that faint hum threading through the air. The flash ended. The shape vanished. The darkness felt too absolute afterward, like the clouds were hiding something on purpose. I sat down on the couch because my knees felt weirdly unsteady. The hum faded, then came back stronger, then faded again. The storm didn't let up. Rain pounded the roof, but the hum cut through it somehow. Another flash, no shape, nothing behind the clouds. The hum stopped. All at once the lake reacted, finally reacting. Wind hit it in a sudden burst, whipping up waves like someone flipped a switch. The trees bent, the cabin creaked. Thunder rolled through the valley. The lights flickered one last time before the power went completely out. I sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the storm thrash around the cabin. The hum didn't return. No more strange reflections, no more outlines behind the clouds. The storm lasted another hour before moving east. When it finally quieted, the lake looked normal again. Broken surface, leftover wind patterns, the way it should have looked the whole time. The clouds thinned out and drifted apart. A few stars showed through. I didn't sleep much, but nothing else happened that night. In the morning, the storm had passed completely. The yard was littered with branches and pine cones. The lake looked like any other lake. The sky was bright and empty. But when I went around the side of the cabin to check the gutters, I found the ladder I'd left lying in the grass standing upright, balanced perfectly. No dents, no mud streaks, no sign that it had fallen or been knocked over by wind. Just standing there like someone placed it with care. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the wind did it. Maybe I'm giving too much weight to things that don't deserve it. But every time a storm comes through now, I catch myself watching the clouds longer than I need to, waiting for lightning to reveal something that shouldn't be there. I was outside behind my apartment building, taking a break from unpacking boxes. I just moved to a small place in Helena, Montana. Cheaper rent, closer to work, quiet neighborhood. The air had been warm all day, just under 70, and even after sunset, it stayed mild. I was leaning on the railing behind the building, sipping a canned iced coffee, looking at nothing in particular. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature dropped. Not like a gust of cold wind or the usual evening chill. It felt instant, like someone flipped a switch on the whole backyard. One breath was normal, the next felt like winter air hitting the back of my throat. I remember actually checking my arms because I expected goosebumps, and they were already there. The change was that fast. I thought maybe a cold front was blowing in, but there was no wind, not even a breeze. The leaves on the hedge didn't move. The air was just colder. I stayed out there because I didn't want to psych myself out over a weird weather shift. I kept telling myself it was mountain air, and mountains do strange things sometimes. Temperature drops happen. Inversions happen. My brain repeated every explanation I could come up with. That's when I saw the dim orb near the horizon. At first I thought it was a plane through thin fog, except there was no fog. It wasn't blinking, and it wasn't moving horizontally. It sat just above the tree line behind the parking lot, a soft, white circle with no glare and no defined edges. It wasn't bright enough to light up the trees or cast a glow. It looked muted, like a lantern wrapped in cloth. I squinted at it, trying to figure out what direction it was coming from. West, maybe toward Red Mountain. But it wasn't getting bigger or smaller, and it wasn't acting like anything I'd ever seen in the sky. Then it slowly started moving upward. Not rising like a drone or plane trying to gain altitude. It looked more like it was fading upward, like someone dragging the brightness slider toward the top of a screen. It didn't speed up or slow down. It didn't waver. Just a steady upward drift, the glow thinning until it disappeared completely. When it vanished, the cold air lingered. I remember standing there with my hands still on the railing, not sure if I should go inside or keep watching the sky. I looked around the yard, half expecting to see someone else outside who might have seen it too, but all the windows were dark except one where a guy I'd never met was watching TV with the blinds half closed. I stayed out there. I didn't want to move. Something about the quiet felt wrong. The cold wasn't lifting either. It stayed sharp and even, like every inch of the yard was holding the exact same temperature. I could feel my breath in front of me, faint but visible. I checked my phone, no service, which was weird because I'd had full bars inside 20 minutes earlier. I walked a few steps across the grass, partly to see if the temp shift was localized. It wasn't. Still cold, still unnaturally even. No sound except a distant highway hum and a dog barking a few streets over. No wind. I was heading back toward the steps when I felt the weirdest sensation, like pressure in my ears. Not popping, not pain, just a gentle push. It reminded me of being in an elevator that slows too gradually for your body to track. A soft imbalance. I shook my head, swallowed, waited. It didn't go away. Then the motion light on the side of the building clicked on. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no branch swaying. The sensor had never been triggered by nothing before, but it flooded the whole side yard with light. My shadow stretched long across the grass, and I felt stupid standing completely still with my breath fogging in front of me. I turned to go inside. Right when I reached the door, the temperature shifted back. The cold didn't fade gradually, it snapped out of the air. 1 second freezing, next second almost warm again. Like stepping from a walk-in freezer to a heated room, except it happened outside with no walls. My phone buzzed in my pocket the same second. Service restored. A couple notifications dropped in, an email from work, a weather alert about potential showers, nothing related to what I'd seen. Inside the apartment, everything felt normal. Warm, quiet. I sat on the couch for a while, shoes still on, trying to decide whether I should check the backyard again or leave it alone for the night. I didn't want to freak myself out or turn every random weather pattern into something meaningful. But I kept replaying that moment, the orb rising and fading upward. The exact smoothness of it, the way it didn't illuminate anything, the way it didn't behave like an object or like light reflecting off clouds. It was as if it didn't belong to the sky at all, but was passing through it. After maybe 20 minutes of pacing around my living room, I finally forced myself back to the window. The yard looked normal. Maybe a bit darker than usual, but normal. Motion light was off. Nothing moving. No sounds except a car passing somewhere down the street. Later, when I brushed my teeth before bed, I noticed something else. The bathroom mirror was fogged at the bottom edge. Not the whole mirror, just the lower half of the glass, like humidity had risen up from the sink. Except I hadn't used hot water, and it wasn't warm enough in the apartment for condensation. And the rest of the mirror surface was clear, perfectly clear, as if only that one band of glass had reacted to something. I wiped it and it cleared, but the moment I stepped back, a faint mist crawled up the bottom edge again. Slow, thin, almost invisible. I ended up leaving the bathroom light on and sleeping on the couch where I could see the window and the hallway at the same time. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, the mirror was normal. The yard was normal. The air was normal. But every time I go outside now, even on warm days, there's a part of me that waits for the temperature to drop again. For no reason. No wind, no warning, and for something dim on the horizon to start rising into the sky. I woke up because my wrist buzzed. At first I thought it was an alarm I'd forgotten to turn off, but when I looked at my smartwatch, it showed a heart rate alert. Not the kind you get from running too hard, the kind it sends when your pulse jumps for no reason. It said I'd spiked to 148 BPM at 2:41 a.m. I was lying flat on my back, breathing normally, not sweating, not startled, just awake, like something had thrown a switch inside me. My bedroom in Ludlow, Colorado is usually pitch black at night. Small town, few streetlights, a lot of open land around. But when I glanced at my window, the blinds were glowing faintly. Not bright, not like a passing car, just a soft, even brightness that made the edges of the slats visible. I pushed myself up, trying to figure out if maybe the moon was out. It wasn't. I'd checked the forecast before bed. Cloudy, maybe light snow before morning. And the glow was too steady to be headlights. Too diffused. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then it faded, and the room went dark again. I sat there listening, waiting for some sound to explain everything. A distant engine, a plane, even thunder would have made me feel better. But there was nothing. Not even the hum of the fridge down the hall, which I suddenly noticed wasn't running. The whole house felt paused. I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my phone from the dresser. No notifications besides the heart rate alert. When I checked the graph, the spike looked wrong, too vertical. It didn't climb and drop. It shot up in a straight line and stopped like someone had cut the wire. I stood by the window for a full minute before I opened the blinds. The yard was quiet. Snow covered the ground in a thin, uneven layer. My neighbor's shed light was off, which wasn't surprising. He always killed it before bed. The only odd thing was the sky. It looked a shade lighter than it should have, like dawn was thinking about starting, even though dawn was hours away. It wasn't bright, just washed out. I stared upward, trying to see if anything was moving. I expected to catch a plane or a satellite, something to hook the moment onto. But nothing crossed the sky, and the lighter color didn't match any direction. It wasn't glowing from the east. It wasn't glowing from the west. It was just everywhere at once. I finally went outside. The cold hit instantly, dry, thin, the kind that shuts your lungs for a second. But that wasn't what got my attention. What got me was the silence. No snowmelt dripping from the gutters, no wind, no highway noise drifting in from town. Even the horses in the field behind my fence weren't making sound, which felt wrong. They always shuffled around at night. I stepped off the porch and onto the snow. The crunch sounded too loud, like the world had been muted, except for whatever I was doing. That washed-out sky hung over everything without changing shape or brightness. I found myself squinting at it, like maybe I could force it to resolve into something normal. That's when I noticed the horses. 3 of them stood near the fence line, completely still, all facing the same direction, north toward the open fields and the hills beyond. They weren't grazing. Their heads were up. Their ears didn't flick. They looked like statues. I whispered, "Hey!" just to break the tension, but none of them moved. The silence pushed in again. My smartwatch buzzed a second time. Heart rate spike. I hadn't even felt my pulse rise. I checked it. 132 BPM and climbing. I took a step back toward the house, and that's when the brightness in the sky changed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift, like something far above had moved and the clouds caught it differently. But it was enough that the snow shadow under the fence line slid an inch to the left. I froze. The horses didn't. One of them finally moved its head. Not down to graze, up, higher, as if it were looking at something directly above us. I followed its gaze. The sky wasn't right. It looked uniform at first, but now that I was really staring, I could see a patch of it that was a shade lighter than the rest. A huge, irregular shape, barely noticeable unless you were searching. It wasn't glowing bright, it was more like the clouds there were thinner, except they weren't moving like clouds. They were holding still. My heart rate spiked again. The watch buzzed against my wrist, almost frantic. The little graph jumped so sharply that it cut off at the top. I didn't want to stand there anymore. I backed toward the porch, keeping my eyes on that lighter patch, trying to decide if it was getting bigger or if I was just noticing more of it. My breath looked weird in the air, too slow to drift, like it was hanging before fading. I reached the steps and grabbed the handrail. The sky pulsed. Once. Not bright, just a flicker in that lighter patch, like someone dimming and undimming a light under a blanket. The horses jerked their heads in unison, not panicked, synchronized. My pulse hammered so hard my fingers tingled. Then the patch faded. It didn't vanish instantly. It thinned out, shrinking inward, until the sky looked normal again. clouds returned to their usual textures. The weird brightness washed away. My yard looked plain and dark. The silence broke with a single sound, the fridge kicking back on inside the house. I didn't realize how much noise had been missing until it returned. I went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. My watch buzzed for a final alert. Heart rate returned to normal. But I didn't feel normal. My chest still felt tight. I checked the timestamp on the first alert, 2:41 a.m. The second, 2:43. I looked at the clock on the stove, 2:46. I wasn't outside more than a few minutes, but it felt longer. Before going back to bed, I looked out the window again. The sky was dark, no lighter patches, no flickers. The horses had wandered away from the fence. Everything looked ordinary. I left the blinds open anyway. I didn't want any barrier between me and the night, not after seeing whatever that had been. I needed to know if it happened again. The next morning, my watch logged 2 more brief spikes around the same time, even though I didn't wake up for them. I've stopped checking the sky for explanations. I just watch for changes now. I was staying at my friend Marco's place in Rockport for a few days, just trying to get out of Denver for a bit. He lived a couple blocks from the beach, so I'd been walking there at night to clear my head. It was early October, not too cold yet, but the wind coming off the water had that sharp edge that warned winter was coming. The night it happened, I couldn't sleep. I'd been tossing around on the pull-out couch for hours, and around 1:30 a.m., I finally gave up and grabbed a hoodie. Marco was dead asleep upstairs. I didn't bother leaving a note. I took his spare sandals from the mat by the door and walked down toward the water. The beach was almost empty. One couple had a fire going way down the shoreline, but the flame was so small it looked like a blinking star. Fog hadn't rolled in yet, so the sky was clear. The kind of clear where you can see stars all the way down to the horizon. The tide was coming in slow. I remember the sand feeling colder than I expected. For some reason, that detail stuck with me. I walked until I found a spot where the sand dipped behind a little rise, blocking most of the light from the houses behind me. I sat and listened to the small waves slap the shore. It was peaceful enough that I started to regret not bringing a blanket to lie down. I don't know how long I was sitting there before I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were just boats. Fishing boats go out late around there, sometimes early, depending on weather. But these didn't look like boats. They were too far out, way past where boats usually anchor, almost at the horizon line. And they were too high above the water, maybe a couple 100 feet up. There were 6 of them, all in a perfect horizontal row, spaced evenly like beads on a string. White lights, not flashing, not shifting in brightness, just hanging there. I squinted, trying to see the shapes around them, but the lights were the only part visible. Everything else was swallowed by the darkness. I got up and took a few steps closer to the water without even thinking about it. The lights didn't move, not even a little, and that's when I started feeling uneasy. Nothing on the ocean just stays like that. I stood there debating whether to go wake Marco. Then the first light dropped. It didn't fall. It didn't flicker. It just moved straight down in a perfectly smooth line like someone was dragging it with a ruler. No acceleration, no curve, just down. It sank into the water without a splash, disappearing instantly. The surface didn't react at all. Not a ripple, not a change in the reflections on the waves. It was like the ocean didn't notice. I stepped back. Sand shifted under my heel. The second light dropped right after, same exact movement, steady, controlled, straight. It vanished into the water like it was sliding behind a curtain. By the time the third one started to descend, the wind picked up. A sudden gust pushed against me hard enough that I had to steady myself. It felt too strong to come out of nowhere like that. Usually the wind builds, but this was like someone turned a fan on. I glanced down the beach. The couple with the fire were packing up fast, kicking sand on the flames, grabbing their bags. One of them was pointing out toward the water. It made me feel better that I wasn't the only one seeing something weird, but they were clearly freaked, and that didn't help. The third, fourth, and fifth lights sank one after another, each spaced maybe a second apart. No sound, no splash, just gone. The last one waited. I don't know how else to explain it. It held its place while the others vanished. For a few seconds, it was the only light out there. I found myself staring at it so hard my eyes burned. Then it started moving, but not down. It shifted to the left. Not much, just a few degrees, but the motion was so smooth and so impossible looking that I felt my stomach twist. Boats drift, planes arc, helicopters wobble. Nothing moves in a perfectly straight sideways slide without changing altitude or angle. The last light stopped again, dead still. The wind hit me harder, colder. A wave broke closer to my feet, but when it receded, I noticed something strange. The sound of the surf had gone dull, not quieter, exactly, but muffled, like my ears had popped, except they hadn't. The final light dropped abruptly. No slow descent this time, just a clean vertical dive straight into the sea. Gone. The moment it vanished, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Like someone closed a door. I stood there waiting for something else to happen. Anything. But the horizon was empty. The ocean was black. Everything looked completely normal. I walked backward a bit, eyes on the water. My heartbeat felt loud in my chest. When I finally turned around to head back to Marco's, I noticed something off about the houses lining the beachfront road. Every porch light was on. I didn't remember them being on when I walked down. The only lights earlier had been from the couple's fire and a few upstairs windows in the rentals behind the dunes. But now every porch light from one end of the beach to the other was glowing, and as I walked past them, they shut off one by one. That sequence made my legs feel weak. I kept telling myself they were on timers or motion sensors, but the timing was too perfect. Each light clicked off right after I passed it, always behind me, never ahead. When I reached Marco's street, I practically jogged the rest of the way. His house looked normal, except for one thing. The little solar path lights in his yard weren't lit. They had been earlier. I remembered them because I'd almost tripped on one coming down the steps. I touched one with my foot just to see if it would turn on. Nothing. Inside, the living room felt stuffy and warm, like the air hadn't moved in hours. I locked the door quietly and checked the time. 2:08 a.m. It hit me then that I'd only been out maybe 40 minutes. It felt longer, like I'd been standing there for hours. I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone looking for any reports of weird lights on the water, but I didn't find anything. Not that night. Not the next morning. I even checked local groups, weather stations, fishing updates. Nothing. When Marco came downstairs around 8, he asked if I'd messed with the thermostat because the house felt strangely warm for October. I told him no. He didn't push it. We drove past the beach later that afternoon. Perfectly normal. People walking dogs, kids throwing rocks, no sign anything had happened. But every time I'm near the ocean now, I catch myself staring out at the horizon a little too long, waiting to see a row of lights hanging there again, perfectly straight, perfectly still, like they never left. I took the photos behind my apartment complex in Flagstaff, just past the tree line where the sky opens up a little. I'd been messing with long exposure shots for weeks, trying to get something decent enough to show my friend Nora, who actually knew what she was doing with the camera. She'd been giving me pointers, mostly stuff about ISO and shutter speed that I barely understood, but it made me feel productive. That night, I went out later than usual. It was close to 11:30, early September, still warm, but with that dry chill that creeps in once the sun's been down a while. The sky was clear in every direction. No wind, no planes heading toward Phoenix, no clouds. Even the traffic noise from the main road was quieter than normal. It was one of those nights where everything felt unusually still. I set up my tripod near a fallen log and aimed the camera straight up. A few streetlights from the complex spilled through the trees behind me, but not enough to ruin the shots. I took a couple practice exposures. Nothing interesting. Just stars, a few faint streaks where I messed up the timing. I adjusted the angle and tried again. On the fourth shot, I thought I saw something move above the pines. A sort of quick shift. Not like a shooting star, more like a shadow gliding across the stars themselves. But when I looked again, everything was normal. I figured it was just my eyes reacting to the bright camera screen. I decided to shoot anyway, 20-second exposure. I didn't breathe, trying to stay perfectly still so I wouldn't bump the tripod. While the shutter was open, I had this weird sense that the air had thickened around me. Not colder, not even warmer, just denser somehow. It reminded me of the way the world feels just before a huge thunderstorm hits, except the sky was totally calm. When the shot finished, I checked the preview. At first, I thought the lens had fogged up, but it wasn't that. Dead center in the frame, right where Polaris should have been, there was a faint oval smudge. Not bright, not dark, just a distortion. As if something had blurred part of the sky in a perfect, smooth shape. I zoomed in, expecting to see a smudge from my thumb or dust on the lens, but the distortion didn't look like anything physical. It had a soft gradient to it, like layers of stars behind it had shifted out of alignment. I turned around and looked at the sky with my own eyes. Nothing there. No blur, no cloud, not even a plane passing by. I wiped the lens anyway, shirt corner, then the microfiber cloth in my pocket. I took another shot from the exact same angle, same settings. 20 seconds later, the preview popped up. Totally normal. Clear stars, no oval, no distortion. I told myself I'd just botched the first one, but my stomach disagreed. There was something off about the whole moment. I could feel it in my shoulders, that strange static feeling tension that shows up when something doesn't add up. As I was trying to brush it off, a faint breeze moved through the trees, even though the air had been still all night. It wasn't strong, but it carried this low, almost electric hum with it, soft enough that I couldn't tell if it was really there or just in my head. It faded as quickly as it came. I tried again with a different angle, toward the northeast, above the darker stretch of woods. While the shutter was open, the breeze stopped again. I felt stupid noticing it, but it was like the air kept turning itself on and off. This time, when the exposure finished, the photo was normal again. I almost relaxed. Then something rustled deeper in the woods. I froze, listening hard. It sounded too even to be an animal. Not the scatter of paws or the shift of weight on branches. More like something large sliding through brush without breaking anything. A smooth, steady movement. I pointed my flashlight toward the noise, but the beam caught only trees and pine needles. I waited. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just the mountain playing tricks on me. I'd heard all sorts of odd sounds out here at night. Still, the hair on my arms was standing up, and not from the temperature. I turned back to the camera and decided to take a rapid burst of shorter exposures, just to see if I could catch anything else weird. I set it to 3-second shots and let it go. The first frame was fine. Stars, trees, faint light pollution. The second frame looked the same. The third frame, this is where things got strange, showed a slight bending of the tree line near the top right corner. Not a blurred motion, but a curve, like the trees themselves had warped inward. Only in that specific shot. I stared at it for a long time, then immediately checked the next frames. All normal. It was like reality had been tugged sideways for 3 seconds and then snapped back. I pulled the camera off the tripod and held it in my hands, suddenly wanting to get out of the clearing. The woods felt different, too quiet, like everything had paused. Even the insects had stopped. That's when I realized something else. The stars directly above me looked brighter. Not a huge difference, but enough that I noticed. It felt like the sky had shifted closer somehow. It gave me an urge to step back, even though nothing was physically lowering. Then a light blinked in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the camera screen glowing in my hand. I lowered it, thinking maybe it had reflected off something behind me, but the woods were pitch dark. I headed back toward the apartment path, walking faster than I probably needed to. As I got closer to the edge of the trees, the normal sounds of the night slowly came back. Crickets, a passing car on the distant road, the rustle of dry grass. Right before I stepped out of the tree line, something made me stop. It was that feeling, like being watched, not from one direction, not from any direction, just watched, observed. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight along the branches. The beam didn't catch anything unusual, but for the briefest second, the light seemed to bend. Not visibly, more like the focus shifted around something I couldn't see. Like the flashlight dipped over a shape that wasn't there a moment before. My heart hammered so hard that I felt it in my throat. I didn't bother looking again. Once I got back inside my apartment, everything felt strangely normal. Too normal, honestly. I sat on the couch and uploaded the photos to my laptop, zooming in on the oval blur over and over. It didn't look like lens flare, it didn't look like motion blur, it didn't look like anything I recognized. A few minutes later, I checked the time. It was 12:42. I had left the apartment at 11:30. I'd taken maybe 10 photos, walked maybe 200 feet into the woods, stood there for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes tops. Yet more than an hour had passed. I went back through the timestamps on the photos. They lined up with the gap, but the sequence didn't make sense. One of the short exposures was timestamped at 12:11. The next was 12:19. No missed shots, no camera errors, just 8 minutes unaccounted for between two frames that showed nothing strange at all. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that faint oval blur hanging in the middle of the sky, something I hadn't seen but the camera had. The next day, I took more photos. Same spot, same settings, same time of night. All of them looked completely normal. But I can't stop thinking about the oval and the bending tree line and how the stars looked brighter, just for a moment, like something large had passed between me and the sky, too fast or too transparent to see. Every time I scroll past that one frame on my laptop, I feel the same tightness in my chest I felt in the woods that night. Not fear exactly, more like the quiet dread of realizing you didn't imagine something after all. Whatever that blur was, I know I wasn't supposed to see it. I was sitting behind my cousin's cabin in northern Idaho when it happened. Early October, around 9 at night. The air had that crisp, dry cold that shows up before winter really settles in, and the sky was cloudy in patches, big, slow-moving shapes drifting across the stars. I'd come out there to get away for a bit, to help him stack firewood and fix the loose siding, and mostly just to not think about work for a few days. That evening, he'd already gone to bed. I stayed outside with a blanket and a mug of tea, sitting on the old wooden bench facing the tree line. It was quiet in a way you only get out there. No cars, no buzzing streetlights, just the occasional pop from the cooling chimney pipe and the soft creaking of branches. I wasn't doing anything, just sitting, zoning out, watching the clouds move. My phone was inside charging. I didn't have a book with me. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Then the ground vibrated. It wasn't strong, not like a quake. More like someone driving heavy machinery a long distance away, except there were no nearby roads, no logging trucks at that hour. It was a gentle, steady vibration, almost like a hum you feel instead of hear. I pressed my palm to the bench, and it was trembling just enough that I could tell I wasn't imagining it. I sat up and looked around, expecting to see headlights coming down the long dirt driveway. Nothing. The woods in front of me were still. The vibration lasted maybe 5 seconds before fading out. I'd just started to relax when I noticed a light moving through the clouds above the treetops. Not bright like a plane or a helicopter, not even as sharp as a star. Just a small, pale pinpoint sliding between two cloud layers. It seemed closer than it should have been, like it wasn't above the clouds, but inside them. It drifted in a perfectly smooth line, not wobbling, not blinking, no sound at all. When it slipped behind a thicker patch of cloud and disappeared, I stood up without even realizing I had moved. Something about it felt off, in a way I couldn't explain. I kept waiting for the light to reappear on the other side of the cloud bank, but it didn't. I stayed there a long minute, listening hard. The woods felt different now, not silent, just muted, the way they get right before a storm. The air felt unusually still, heavier somehow. Then I heard a soft snap in the trees. I turned toward it, squinting into the dark. It wasn't close, maybe 20 or 30 yards in, but it wasn't a normal branch noise either. It didn't sound like weight on wood, more like something brushing a tree lightly but deliberately. I stepped closer to the edge of the yard. There was nothing to see, just the faint outlines of trunks and the dim reflection of the cabin porch light on the dew. I called out, "Hello?" Even though I knew nobody would answer. My voice sounded too loud in the cold air. No movement followed, no repeat of the sound. I backed up a little, returning to the bench, but not sitting down. I kept scanning the sky. The clouds had shifted again, opening a gap directly above me. I could see a handful of stars, crisp and steady. Then one of them pulsed. Not bright, not dramatic. Just a quick, soft swell, like someone lightly tapping a dimmer switch. I blinked a few times, thinking it was my eyes adjusting. But then the star moved. Only a tiny shift, like a half inch at arm's length, but enough that my stomach clenched. It slid a little to the left, paused, and then returned to its original spot. Exactly the same spot, like rewinding a tape. I felt the ground vibrate again, this time even softer, more like a deep pressure under my feet than an actual tremor. I stepped away from the bench and toward the cabin door, not running but moving fast. I kept looking up, expecting something else to happen, but the sky was normal again. Clouds drifting, stars steady. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left. Boots by the door, the kettle drying in the sink, my cousin snoring down the hall. I locked the door out of habit, not because I thought it would do anything. I tried to shake it off, but about 10 minutes later, while I was still standing in the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The mug I'd been drinking from was still warm, but the tea inside was cold. Like cold, almost refrigerator cold. I touched the outside again just to be sure, and the ceramic felt warm enough that it should have kept the drink lukewarm at least. I took a sip. It tasted like it had been sitting out for an hour. That didn't make sense. I'd only just come inside. I checked the clock on the stove. 9:46 p.m. I'd gone out around 9:20. I remembered the time because my cousin had said goodnight at 9:15. I knew I hadn't been outside more than 10 minutes before the vibration and the light. Maybe 15, tops. But the tea tasted like it had been forgotten long enough to cool completely. I tried not to think too hard about it. I poured the rest down the sink and went to the living room. I tried watching something on my phone, but every few seconds I found myself glancing at the window. Around 10:30, I decided to go to bed. The woods were quiet again, too quiet. Even with the windows shut, I usually heard owls or the wind or branches against the siding, but that night there was nothing. When I finally fell asleep, it didn't last. I woke up a little after midnight to a faint buzzing sound, not loud enough to be a phone, not steady enough to be an appliance. It seemed to come from somewhere outside the cabin, maybe above it. A low, intermittent vibration, like something large but distant. I thought about waking my cousin, but the buzzing stopped before I could even sit up fully. The silence that followed was so complete it felt unnatural. I got out of bed and looked out the small window facing the backyard. The bench was barely visible in the moonlight. The tree line looked totally normal. Nothing moved. I stayed there maybe 2 minutes, waiting. That's when the clouds above the trees lit up. Not bright, not like lightning. Just a soft, pale glow diffusing through the lowest layer. It lasted only 2 seconds, maybe less, and then vanished without a fading effect. Just gone. No sound, no movement, no trace. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, when I went back outside, the bench looked fine. The ground didn't show anything unusual. But when I walked into the spot where I'd been standing the night before, I noticed something subtle. The dirt felt looser, like it had been disturbed recently, not footprints, just unsettled. When my cousin came out to join me, he asked why I looked so tired. I told him I'd stayed up too late reading. I don't know why I didn't mention any of it. I think part of me needed to pretend it was normal until I got home. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on my couch replaying everything in my head, over and over. The vibration in the ground, the drifting light, the pulsing star, the sudden glow above the trees. None of it fit together, but it all felt connected. What stuck with me most was the way the light in the clouds had vanished. Not faded, not moved out of sight, just switched off. Like it had been looking for something, then decided to stop. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. exactly. I know because I looked at my phone as soon as I sat up, or tried to. My heart was already pounding, and I couldn't figure out why at first. I didn't remember a dream or any noise, but I had this overwhelming feeling that someone had been right next to the bed, like they'd just stepped back when I opened my eyes. I don't usually scare easy. I've lived alone for 6 years. Got used to the creaks, the hums, the occasional raccoon knocking over the trash can outside. This was different. This felt personal, like someone had been watching me for a while. My room was dim. I don't have blackout curtains or anything, so a little light from the apartment complex parking lot comes through the blinds. I sat completely still for a few seconds, trying to listen. No footsteps. No sound at all. I glanced toward the door. It was still closed, same as I left it. No wind, no AC kicking on, no hum from the fridge down the hall, just silence. That's when I noticed my phone was on. Screen lit, camera open. It was resting on my chest, angled straight up at the ceiling fan. I didn't fall asleep like that. I never sleep with it on me. I usually leave it on the nightstand, plugged in. I picked it up and closed the camera app. My hands were shaking a little. It wasn't just that it was on. The camera had been recording. A video was saved. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, staring at the thumbnail, a grainy, dark frame of the ceiling fan, unmoving. Eventually, I tapped it. The clip was 1 minute and 42 seconds long. It started in silence, just the ceiling. I thought maybe I'd rolled onto the phone somehow and opened it by accident, but I always locked the screen before bed. About 10 seconds in, there was a low rustling sound. Not from the phone, but in the room. It was faint, like fabric moving slowly, the kind of sound you hear when someone stands from a chair and adjusts their coat. I couldn't see anything on the screen, but the mic picked it up clearly. Then there was a second sound, sharper, like something small tapping lightly against the wood floor. 3 short taps, pause, then 2 more. I felt frozen watching it, trying to see any hint of movement in the video, but the whole time, it just stayed fixed on the ceiling. The fan blades didn't move, no shifting shadows, no shapes. Around the 1 minute mark, the phone itself tilted slightly. Not much, maybe just a few degrees to the left. Enough that the corner of the screen caught a sliver of my face near the edge of the frame. My eyes were still closed. Then the video ended. I sat there for a long time. I didn't play it again. I got out of bed and checked the apartment. Bathroom, living room, kitchen. Nothing out of place. Door still locked, chain still on. When I got back to the bedroom, I noticed something else. My bedroom window was unlocked. That made no sense. I never opened that window. It faces the alley, and the lock is one of those little latches you have to physically slide with your thumb. It doesn't just come undone. I locked it the day I moved in and haven't touched it since. But that night, it was fully unlatched, just sitting there. No sign it had been opened otherwise. Screen still in place, glass untouched. I locked it again, checked it twice. Over the next few nights, nothing happened. But I couldn't sleep well. I kept waking up randomly, always around 3 a.m., sometimes exactly 3:14 again. I stopped leaving the phone on the nightstand, started putting it in a drawer across the room. Still, I'd sometimes wake to find it lying next to me again. Camera open, aimed at the ceiling. I checked the app settings, turned off every shortcut I could find, disabled voice activation, updated the phone, wiped cache, even factory reset once. Still happened. One morning, about a week after the first incident, I found a new photo in my gallery. It wasn't a video this time, just one image. Black and gray, mostly noise, like it was taken in a dark room. But in the lower left corner, there was a blur, something vertical, faintly reflective, like a sleeve or a narrow shoulder turned halfway toward the camera. I zoomed in as far as I could, but the image broke up quickly. I deleted it. After that, I started sleeping with a cheap motion sensor on the door. Nothing ever triggered it, no alerts. But every few days, my phone would still move on its own. I'd go to sleep with it in one spot and find it moved. On the bed, on the floor, under my pillow. Always camera open. I eventually bought a used flip phone and started using that at night. Left the smartphone in a drawer with the battery out. That seemed to stop it. But sometimes, usually when I'm half asleep or just drifting off, I get this faint feeling like something's just left the room, like I missed it by a few seconds. And once in a while, I'll wake up at 3:14, sure that I'm being watched. And the old phone, even with the battery out, will be warm to the touch. It was around 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday night when I drove through that stretch of farmland just south of Loma, Colorado. I remember the time because I had checked the dashboard clock after passing the last gas station before the county line, trying to gauge if I'd make it to Grand Junction without having to stop again. I was alone, heading back from visiting my cousin in Montrose. The drive was mostly uneventful, flat 2-lane roads, irrigation ditches, the occasional deer warning sign. Dead quiet. The air was that kind of dry chill you get after a hot day cools off too fast. The windows were down halfway, letting in the breeze, and I had the radio low, tuned to some late-night AM talk station, mostly static with bits of an old country song bleeding through now and then. It started with a smell. That's the first thing I noticed. I was passing this big open field, flat, endless rows of what I think was corn, as though it could have been something else. I caught a weird scent, sharp and sour, not like manure or pesticide. It reminded me of when you crack open a battery. Real faint, but definitely not right. I slowed down a little and leaned forward over the steering wheel to glance across the field, just out of habit more than anything. That's when I saw it. There was this huge, perfectly round section in the middle of the field where the crops were just down, completely flattened. It had to be at least 40 or 50 feet across, maybe more. No damage, no sign of machinery, no tractor lights in sight. Just this smooth, circular dent in the corn that looked too clean to be natural. Even from the road, I could tell the plants weren't broken or torn up. They were just pressed down, like something heavy had hovered right on top of them. No tracks leading in, no footprints. I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder without really thinking about it. The static on the radio kicked in hard the second I stopped, just a burst, almost like a pop, then dead air, then more static again, rising and falling in weird little pulses. I turned the volume down but didn't shut it off. The smell was stronger with the windows down. Still faint, but it was there. Chemical, like hot plastic and ozone, maybe? Hard to describe. I got out, leaving the engine running. The whole area was quiet, way too quiet. No insects, no wind rustling the corn, but nothing. I stood by the ditch for a second and looked out across the field toward that circle. The moon was bright enough that I could see the edges clearly. It wasn't some random pattern. It was precise, like a compass had drawn it. I didn't go in. I don't know why. I'm not the nervous type usually, but something about the air made my skin itch. It felt like the air was heavier near that spot, like the pressure changed almost. I stood there maybe 2 minutes tops, just staring, breathing through my mouth to avoid the smell, and then I heard it. A hum, low, faint, almost more like a vibration than a sound. I thought it might be my engine at first, but I stepped back toward the car and realized it wasn't coming from that. It was coming from the field. Not above, not under, just around. It was steady, mechanical but soft, like a distant generator. And then it stopped, just blinked out mid-tone. I climbed back into the car and shut the door. The radio was still crackling, but now there were little patterns in it, like short blips. I could have convinced myself it was Morse code if I knew what that sounded like. I sat there for a few seconds, hand on the wheel, thinking about whether I should call someone. Sheriff's office, maybe. But what would I even say? Hey, there's a big flat circle in a field, and it smells weird? Right before I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Just a habit. There was a figure standing out in the field. Not in the circle, off to the side of it, maybe 20 feet from the edge. Hard to tell how tall, but definitely human-shaped. Still, just standing there. I froze, looked again. Gone. Not walked away, not ducked or moved. Just wasn't there anymore. Like I blinked and it vanished. I didn't wait around. Pulled back onto the road fast, tires kicking up dust. The radio cleared up a bit the farther I got, but never totally returned to normal until I was at least a mile past that field. A few minutes later, I passed an old barn with a busted windmill and figured that was the edge of the farmland. I told myself I imagined the person. Maybe it was a shadow or one of those scarecrows that look too real from the wrong angle. That made sense, kind of. But about 20 minutes down the road, something else happened. I came around a curve and noticed that all the car's dash lights flickered, not off, just dimmed for half a second and came back full. The headlights too. It was enough to make me check the battery gauge, but everything looked fine. Engine ran normal. Still, it rattled me a little. I glanced at the time, 11:12. The drive between where I pulled off and that curve should have taken about 10 minutes, maybe 12. I lost almost 20. I remember that part clearly, because I was already mentally calculating how late I'd get in. I don't remember pulling over or stopping. There were no turns, no exits, just a straight, flat highway. When I got to my hotel in Grand Junction, I parked under the light, turned the car off, and just sat there for a few minutes. The smell from earlier seemed to cling to my clothes. I even sniffed the fabric of my hoodie and could still catch traces of it. Eventually, I checked in, showered, and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about the circle and the figure. I went back the next morning. Same road, same field. The crops were still flattened, still a perfect circle, but the color was wrong. The plants inside the circle looked duller, a little more grayish, maybe. Everything else around it was fine. No sign anyone had been there. No vehicles, no footprints, just the circle. And no smell. I stood there for a while, half expecting to hear the hum again. I even rolled the windows down to listen. Nothing. Dead quiet, same as the night before, but no weird vibes this time. No static on the radio either. I tried tuning it to that same station, got regular noise, no pulses, no pops, just bad AM reception like normal. I thought about walking out there, maybe just to the edge. I didn't. I drove away, and I haven't taken that route since. I was heading home from a friend's place in central Nebraska one night in early September. I left Grand Island around 11:45 p.m., cruising west on Highway 30 toward Kearney. It was warm, humid even, and the night was clear with a half moon rising. I had the windows cracked, radio tuned to an oldies AM station. Nothing loud, just enough to keep me from drifting. The highway that time of night is nearly empty, especially outside of town. Long stretches of flat fields on both sides, occasional farmhouses way back off the road, silos and grain bins blinking red with aircraft lights. I was about 20 miles from home, thinking I'd stop for caffeine at a 24-hour diner just off the next exit, when I noticed something ahead. A light in the field to my right. At first I thought it was a spotlight on a tractor or a pump jack, something stationary. But as I drew closer, it didn't look like any farm light I'd ever seen. It was pale, not yellow or orange like sodium vapor, more like a cold white. And it wasn't fixed on the ground. It seemed to hover maybe 10 feet above the stubble, right in the middle of a harvested cornfield. No support beams, no glow on the ground beneath it, just this bright, even oval of light up in the air. I slowed down a little to look, kept scanning for a vehicle, someone with a flashlight out there. But there was nothing. No truck, no person, no equipment. Just the light hanging over the field without a source. I found myself squinting at it through the windshield, and that's when the radio started crackling. At first, it was just tiny bursts, like someone was turning the dial through static. Then it filled the whole speaker, white noise layered with low pops, like a distant broadcast fighting to come through. I reached to turn the volume down, and that's when the engine hiccuped. I felt it in the seat, a quick stumble, like the car lost power for a fraction of a second. My foot was still on the gas, so it rolled forward, but then that hiccup happened again. The tachometer needle dipped, and the headlights dimmed a little. I glanced down at the dash. Nothing lit up, no warning symbols, just that slow blip in the RPMs. The light in the field didn't change. It stayed exactly where it was, perfectly still, like it was waiting. I eased off the gas and drifted past it, keeping my eyes on the road. The radio was still static, and the engine felt weird, like it was missing a beat every so often. But the car wasn't stalling. Not really, just sputtering. Then everything went quiet. Not silent, exactly. Just a sudden absence of noise that made the next moment stand out too sharply. The radio cut out, the engine smoothed out, the hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only thing left. I glanced in the rearview and saw the road behind me, nothing unusual. Then I looked at the odometer. I had passed the exit for the diner about 5 miles back. The next thing I really noticed was that I was parked on the shoulder about 10 miles past the light, hands still on the wheel, seatbelt clicked in, engine idling. I didn't remember turning off the highway. I didn't remember driving the 10 miles, just quiet, continuous motion straight ahead. It was like the memory of it didn't get saved in my head. I let the car idle there for a moment and tried to piece it together. Looked at the clock. It said 12:27 a.m. My phone showed full signal and no missed calls, nothing unusual in notifications. I turned the radio back on. Normal station, clear signal, no static at all. I snapped the gear into drive and kept going. About a mile up the road, there was a rest stop, so I pulled in. Parked under the lights, walked around outside for a bit, trying to remember if I hit my speed or the cruise control or anything that could explain the gap. But nothing fit. I hadn't braked, I hadn't turned off, I hadn't taken my hands off the wheel, and there was no record in my head of the miles in between. I thought about the light, about how sudden everything had changed once I passed it. I drove back toward where it must have been, parked and walked out into the field. But there was no sign of anything. No glow, no footprints, no tracks in the dirt, just empty stubble and the usual distant farm lights. I went back to the rest stop and looked at the field again from there through binoculars. Earth was flat and featureless, the way it always is this time of year. The horizon just blended into the sky. Nothing moving, nothing unusual. Just the normal quiet of rural Nebraska at night. I sat in the car for a bit before turning back onto the highway. Coffee from a vending machine sipped while the engine warmed. The air smelled like cold asphalt and faint diesel. That drive home, nothing else weird happened. The radio worked. The engine stayed smooth. I remember thinking I had to be tired, or maybe the stress of work was catching up with me and my brain was playing tricks. But later that week, when I drove the same stretch of road at the same time, about midnight, I saw something odd again. Not the light, not a repeat of that night, just a pair of distant headlights pulled off on the same shoulder where I'd ended up, and out in the field where the light had been, there was this long patch of ground that looked like the snowplow blade had scraped last winter. A smooth, elongated mark that ended abruptly, right where those lights would have hovered. Nothing definitive, just a line in the dirt I couldn't explain. I parked a little ways past, looked back, and at that moment a breeze came up, rustling the cornstalk remnants in the field, and I drove on. I was driving east on Route 87 just past midnight, somewhere between Roundup and Grass Range. That stretch of highway is long, empty, and dark. No towns, no lights, barely any other cars. It was late September, cold enough that I had the heat on low and the windows up. I had a thermos of coffee in the passenger seat and an old country playlist running through my truck's Bluetooth. I wasn't tired exactly, but I was zoning out a little, just trying to make miles. That part of Montana is flat in some spots and hilly in others. You can see for miles when you hit the right rise, especially on a clear night like that. The sky was sharp with stars, like someone had punched holes in black paper. Not a single cloud. I remember I was passing mile marker 101 when I noticed something weird. The stars directly in front of me, just ahead over the road, started disappearing, not all at once. It was like someone was pulling a curtain across the sky, left to right. First a few, then a dozen, then a patch as wide as my windshield. I slowed down, thinking maybe some fog was rolling in or a thin cloud bank, but it wasn't that. There was no haze, no shift in temperature, and the stars around the missing section stayed clear and bright. I leaned forward over the steering wheel and stared up through the windshield. The shape that was blocking the stars wasn't visible exactly, it wasn't lit, but I could tell it was there by what it was covering. It was a void, a moving absence, like someone had cut out part of the sky and pasted over it with something perfectly black. It wasn't shaped like a plane or anything with wings, it was just flat, wide, silent, and slow. The radio cut out at that exact moment. Not gradually, just silence, then a beep, like when you hold the power button too long. Then it switched to the setup screen like it was fresh out of the box. Factory reset. No saved stations, no Bluetooth devices. Like someone had wiped it clean. I hadn't touched anything. I pulled over onto the shoulder. There weren't any other cars in sight. No taillights, no headlights coming up behind. I turned off the engine and stepped out, keeping the door open behind me. The only sound was the wind. Dry grass hissing along the ditch. No insects, no distant highway hum. Just me in the dark. I tilted my head back again, and the stars were still missing. The shape had stopped moving. It was just hovering, covering maybe a third of the visible sky above the road. No lights, no sound. It didn't feel like anything was watching me, but it also didn't feel like I was alone. Then, all at once, the stars came back. No transition. 1 second they were gone, the next they were back in perfect clarity, like flipping a light switch. I blinked a few times and waited, but nothing else happened. I got back in the truck and turned the key. The dashboard lit up like usual, but the clock had reset to 12, blinking. My phone still had signal, and when I checked the time, it said 12:46 a.m. I'd looked at the dashboard just before pulling over. It was 12:19 then. I had lost almost 30 minutes. I tried syncing the phone back to the radio, but the system didn't even recognize it. I had to repair the Bluetooth like it had never been connected. The entire system had been wiped. My contacts, playlists, even the name I gave the truck in the interface, gone. I drove another 15 miles to the next pullout, a little rest stop with a picnic table and trash bins. I parked and just sat there for a while, staring out across the prairie. Still no other cars, no planes, just darkness and silence. I kept looking up, half expecting something to block out the sky again, but it didn't. The only odd thing after that was the engine. It ran fine, but the idle felt different somehow. A little rougher, maybe. Like something had changed in how it handled, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I had the truck checked the following week. Nothing wrong, no codes thrown. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few days. Then I mentioned it to my brother, Craig, just casually. He's an electrical engineer in Helena. I figured if anyone would have an explanation for a wiped radio and 30 minutes of dead time, it'd be him. But all he said was, "Huh, that's weird," and changed the subject. A few nights later, I checked the truck again, just out of curiosity. I went through all the presets, looked for any saved history. Nothing. But when I flipped over to AM, one of the buttons was still mapped. Just one. It wasn't something I'd ever saved. It was set to a frequency way off the normal range, like 1720 or something, farther up than I thought the dial even went. When I clicked it, all I heard was a faint whine. Not static, not a voice, just a low, wavering tone. It didn't sound like any station bleed or interference. It sounded almost patterned, like a signal that meant something, but not for me. I turned it off. Didn't touch it again. A few months passed. No more missing stars, no more blank skies. But I started noticing something with my phone. Random photos would appear in the camera roll. Black frames, like someone had taken a picture in a pitch-dark room. Always around midnight. I chalked it up to pocket taps, even though I keep the phone locked. One night, I went through the metadata out of curiosity. One of the black photos had a GPS tag. That wasn't unusual. But it didn't match where I'd been. It was 5 miles north, near an old dirt access road I hadn't been down in years. The timestamp was 12:31 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was asleep at home that night. I drove out there the next weekend. There was nothing to see, just gravel and fields and an old grain silo that had been rusted out for a decade. But when I stopped and stepped out of the truck, my ears started ringing. Not loud, not painful, just a steady pressure. I got back in and drove home. I haven't gone back. The truck still runs fine. No more wipes, no more missing time. But sometimes I'd drive that stretch of 87 and catch myself staring up at the sky too long, just waiting, watching. Every once in a while, I think I see something move up there, a shape that doesn't quite belong, but the stars don't go out. Not yet. It was late March, and I was walking home from Evan's place. We'd been watching some playoff game I didn't really care about, just hanging out. He lives about 6 blocks from me, and it's a quiet enough neighborhood that I usually just walk back even if it's late. That night it was close to 1 a.m., cold but not freezing, and dead quiet, except for some distant traffic from the freeway. I was halfway down Ashby Lane, right by the park where the sidewalk cuts between a line of pine trees and a little drainage ditch. No one else around, not even cars. I had my hands stuffed in my jacket pockets, head down, not thinking about much. Then all of a sudden, I got this, pull. Not a noise or a flash or anything obvious, just this weird sensation, like a hand nudging under my chin, making me look up. I stopped walking without even realizing it. And right then, just as my eyes lifted past the rooftops, I saw a light in the sky. It was dim, like maybe the brightness of a distant star, but closer, way closer. I knew it wasn't a plane or a helicopter because it wasn't blinking or moving. It was just there, frozen midair, almost directly above the street, maybe a few hundred feet up. It hadn't been there a second before. As soon as I made eye contact with it, it stopped. I mean, literally stopped, like it had been gliding or drifting and then froze, instantly, the way a cursor snaps to a grid. It hovered perfectly still for what felt like a long time, but was probably just 5 or 6 seconds. Then it started drifting again, diagonally, like a feather on a string, except with purpose. It wasn't random, just smooth. It didn't blink, didn't hum, didn't make any sound at all. The air was totally still. I stayed rooted there, following it with my eyes as it moved across the sky, sliding out toward the eastern edge of the neighborhood. It passed over the park, over the elementary school, past the trees, and then just faded out. Like not zipped away or blinked off. just slowly dimmed until it wasn't there anymore. I didn't move for a good 30 seconds after that. My ears were ringing, but not from a sound. It was like the pressure in the air had shifted while the thing was there, and when it was gone, everything snapped back to normal. I finally got my legs working and started walking again, a little faster this time. I pulled my phone out to check the time and saw the screen flicker. Not fully on or off, just this quick pulse of static like an old TV. It only lasted half a second. After that, everything seemed fine, but I noticed the battery percentage had dropped from 72% to 58% in just a couple minutes. I turned down Sycamore, 2 blocks from my place, and kept glancing up, half expecting the light to come back. That's when I saw someone standing on the edge of their lawn, motionless, just standing there, facing the sky. I slowed down. It was a man, maybe mid-50s, bald in a zip-up hoodie and pajama pants. He wasn't holding a phone or anything. He didn't even seem to notice me. He just stood there, staring upward, eyes wide. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything in the sky. Just stars. I hesitated for a second, then said, "You okay, man?" He didn't answer, didn't even blink. After a few more steps, I looked back and he was gone. Not like he'd turned around and walked away. I mean, gone. The lawn was empty, the porch light still on, door closed. I hadn't heard a door shut. I didn't hear footsteps. Just gone. I made it home and locked the door behind me, which I never usually do. I pulled all the blinds closed too. Sat on the edge of the bed for a while, the lock still wearing my jacket, and opened the weather app on my phone to see the wind speeds and cloud cover for earlier in the night. Everything was normal. I tried to sleep, but kept replaying that frozen moment in my head, the way the light stopped when I looked at it, like it had been waiting for me. Around 3:20 a.m., I finally drifted off. My dreams were weird, silent and bright, but I couldn't remember any of them clearly the next morning. When I woke up, the only unusual thing was that my phone's compass kept spinning slowly in one direction whenever I opened it. Not jerking around like when you're inside, just this steady rotation that didn't match where I was facing. It stopped doing that later in the day. I didn't tell Evan. I didn't tell anybody. There's nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like I imagined it or dreamed it or saw a drone. But I've seen drones. I've seen satellites, planes, weather balloons, all of it. None of them behave like that light did. None of them wait for you to notice them. I didn't notice the audio file until almost noon the next day. I'd been working from home, half distracted, going through emails on my laptop when I got a notification from my phone that storage was running low. I tapped into it, thinking I'd just delete a few videos or clear out the downloads folder, but there was this one file near the top of the list I didn't recognize. Audio 0014.m4a, 14 seconds long, created at 3:12 a.m. That caught my attention right away because I hadn't been awake at that time. I don't have any kind of sleep recording app, never installed anything like that. I checked again to see if it was a leftover file from something else, maybe a voice memo from work, or something I'd accidentally recorded earlier in the day. But the timestamp was specific, 3:12 a.m. that night. It wasn't labeled by an app, just a raw audio file in the internal recordings folder, which I never use. I put on headphones and hit play. For the first few seconds, it was mostly static. Not loud, more like distant white noise. There were faint background hisses and pops, almost like an old analog recording, except I don't own anything that would make that kind of sound. Then about 4 seconds in, there was a click. Then another, soft, not mechanical, not like a switch, more organic, like 2 wet fingernails tapping together, if that makes any sense. Click, 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 perfectly spaced, a short pause, then the pattern again. Maybe 5 or 6 in total before it stopped. Then just more static until the file ended. I played it 3 times thinking maybe I was hearing it wrong. The rhythm didn't change. It wasn't interference. It felt intentional. I didn't sleep well the night before, but I hadn't thought much of it. I'd gone to bed around 11:30 and woke up groggy at 7. I do remember waking up once in the dark and checking the time on my phone. It was just after 3 a.m., I think. I had this vague sense that something had stirred me, but there wasn't any noise. Just that off feeling you get sometimes, like something had just stopped. I live alone in a duplex outside Flagstaff. One story, nothing fancy, tucked up against the backside of a hill. My bedroom's at the back of the house, no windows facing the street, just one small one that looks out toward a patch of scrub pine and the slope beyond. I keep my phone on the nightstand. It's always in do not disturb mode overnight with no voice assistant, nothing that should be listening for commands. And like I said, I don't use sleep apps. I checked battery history. Nothing showed as active at that time. No media apps, no system log of anything happening around 3:12 a.m., just the file. I thought maybe I'd rolled over and hit the screen somehow. But even then, how would the recording app have opened? I tested it. It took 3 taps just to get to it, and the file name it saved didn't match how the native voice recorder usually labels things. I don't know why, but the clicking stuck in my head all day. I kept hearing it in the back of my thoughts. Not loud, just there. I finally told myself it must have been a glitch or something from outside, maybe a raccoon or a branch tapping the side of the house. That night, before I went to bed, I opened the window a crack just to see if anything outside could be making that sound. I stood there in the dark for a minute. Nothing. Just a few crickets, the wind through the trees. No clicks. I turned off the light and got into bed. I charged the phone in the exact same place on the nightstand. When I woke up the next morning, there was another file. Audio 1/5.m4a. 3 a.m. I didn't play it right away. I stared at the file name for a while. Just the fact that it was there made my stomach tighten. Same size. 14 seconds. Eventually I put on the headphones. Same static, same faint background hiss. Then the clicking, but it was closer this time. Louder, still soft but more pronounced. Same rhythm. Click, click, click. And right at the end there was a pause. Then one final click, louder than the rest. Almost sharp. Then silence. I pulled the headphones off. I didn't sleep the following night. I left the bedroom light on. I kept the phone unplugged. I deleted the previous files, put the phone in airplane mode, closed every app, powered it off completely. When I woke up, it was back on. Battery at 74%. Last activity 3:09 a.m., and there was a new file, audio 06.m4a. 14 seconds. I didn't listen to that one right away either. I sat in the kitchen for half an hour just staring at the screen. Then I played it. The static was lighter this time, almost silent, and there were no clicks. Not right away. There was just breathing. Faint, ragged, like someone standing just far enough from the mic to barely register. A long exhale, then another. Then the clicking started. One click, another, then nothing. The file cut off before the 14-second mark. Just ended mid-hiss. That was the day I called my sister. I didn't say everything. Just told her I'd been hearing weird things at night, and I wasn't sleeping well. She offered to let me stay over, but I brushed it off. Told her I was probably just stressed. I went for a long drive that afternoon just to clear my head. I left my phone on the passenger seat the whole time, screen facing down. When I got home around 5 p.m., there was a new notification. The voice recorder had tried to launch itself at 3:11 p.m. while I was driving, while the phone was locked and untouched. No file this time, just the attempt. That night, I left the phone in the kitchen. I shut the bedroom door and turned on a white noise machine, put my watch in airplane mode, powered everything else off. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. fully alert. Not panicked, just awake. I couldn't hear anything. The house felt quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I sat up, not moving, just listening. There were no clicks, no breathing, no sounds at all. I stayed that way for a while. Then finally I got up and walked out to the kitchen. The phone was on. New file, audio 0017.m4a. This one was 14 seconds like the others. Timestamp 3:12 a.m. I took a breath, sat down at the table, and played it. No static this time, just one sound, repeating, very slow, very clear. It was the sound of my bedroom door opening. Hinge creak, light wooden shift, a faint click as it swung. Then nothing. The door had been closed when I woke up. I'm sure of that. I don't know how the phone recorded it. I don't know what's been triggering it. I checked for malware, factory reset the whole device, wiped everything. I started sleeping with the phone off and sealed in a drawer. No new recordings since then. But sometimes, just after 3 a.m., I wake up anyway and lie there, listening. We were somewhere outside Klatskaney, heading west on Highway 30. Thick fog rolling in across the road like it always does out there in late fall. My friend Jen and I had spent the afternoon in Astoria, mostly wandering antique shops and hitting up a brewery, and we were driving back to Portland. I was the one driving. Jen was in the passenger seat half asleep, hood pulled up, feet on the dash. It was maybe 7:30 p.m., not fully dark yet, but the fog made it feel later. One of those damp Oregon evenings where your headlights barely cut more than a few yards ahead, and even high beams don't help. Trees on either side blurred into gray. We were quiet for a while. No music, just the low rumble of the road and that soft, white-out kind of silence you get in fog. Then I noticed something strange above the tree line. There was a glow in the clouds, round, hazy, kind of soft. At first, I figured it was the moon. It looked like the moon behind cloud cover, exactly how you'd expect, muted, diffused. But then I saw the actual moon. It was off to the left, higher up, also behind clouds, but clear enough to see its shape, bright and sharp-edged. That's when I realized the other one was lower, dimmer, and wrong. Not quite the same color, a little yellower. I slowed a bit without meaning to. We were already crawling through the fog, but I let off the gas and just stared at it. The two glows weren't next to each other, they were offset at a weird angle. The real moon was in the upper left corner of the windshield. The other glow hovered almost dead ahead, just above the trees. It looked like a second moon, but off. I glanced at Jen. She hadn't noticed. She was staring at her phone, earbuds still in, though nothing was playing. I think she was just zoning out. So I said, "Hey, do you see that?" She looked up. "What?" "That glow. There. Straight ahead, it looks like." And right then, before I could finish the sentence, it faded. Not like a light turning off, more like watching steam dissipate. It dissolved into the fog so smoothly that I second-guessed whether I'd seen it at all. Jen squinted the windshield. "What glow?" "It was... I don't know. It was right there. Looked like the moon, but too low." She looked around and pointed out the actual moon. "You mean that?" "No. There was another one, like, just now." She gave me a look. Not mocking, just the kind people give when they're trying to figure out if you're messing with them. I didn't say anything else. Just kept driving. The fog got thicker as we dipped into a low stretch between hills. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet. Every now and then we'd pass a mailbox or a street sign, but I couldn't read any of them until they were right outside the window. Jen put on some low ambient playlist, something barely noticeable, and leaned back again. I kept thinking about the second glow. My mind ran through possibilities. Reflection off the windshield, but it had depth. It was in the sky. Headlight flare from an oncoming car. No cars had passed us for at least 5 minutes before or after. Some weird kind of spotlight from where? There were no buildings, no towns, nothing but trees and old fence posts. Then, about 10 minutes later, something else happened. I noticed that Jen's phone screen kept flickering on. I didn't say anything at first. It would go dark, then light up again for no reason. Not a notification, just the lock screen popping on. The first couple times I figured she was tapping it, but after a while I noticed her hands were in her hoodie pocket and she was staring out the window. Then mine did it too. I had my phone in the center console plugged into the USB. The screen turned on by itself, stayed lit for a few seconds, then went dark again. 10 seconds later, it came back on. No calls, no messages, just the lock screen. 7:43 p.m., Jen glanced down. "Why'd your phone just light up?" "I don't know. Yours is doing it too." She picked hers up. Maybe signals jumping around. She opened the home screen. Bars looked normal, 2 or 3 LTE, but she couldn't load anything. No weather, no maps. I tried mine. Same thing. It acted like it had data, but wouldn't actually do anything. The GPS dot on my map had frozen about a mile back. I pulled over at a wide shoulder near an old logging road, just to think. Fog was still thick. Maybe even worse now. Jen looked at me like she was trying to read something behind my expression. "You're weirding me out, dude." I laughed a little. "Sorry, I definitely saw something." She looked back out the windshield. "Like what?" I paused. "It looked like a second moon, but it disappeared the second I pointed it out." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure it wasn't a flare or something?" "I don't know. It didn't feel like that." She didn't say anything for a second, then it got quiet right after you said that. I hadn't noticed it until she said it, but she was right. The fog had eaten the sound of the road. No wind, no insects, No engine noise from the trucks we'd occasionally hear from the highway, just a faint ringing in my ears like dead air. That pressure feeling kicked in next. Not painful, just like something shifted in the air, like the cabin pressure had changed. Then we saw it again. Not in the sky this time, but through the trees to the right. A soft white glow about 20 yards in. Not a beam, not a flashlight. It lit up the fog between the trunks, just enough to suggest a shape behind it, but not enough to see clearly. Jen leaned forward. Do you see that? Yeah. It wasn't moving. The light stayed in the same spot for maybe 15 seconds, pulsing gently. Not like a strobe, more like breathing. Then it dimmed. Not off, just lower. Then bright again. Then gone. I stepped out of the car. Jen hissed, "What are you doing?" "I just want to see." "No, get back in." I stood there with one foot on the pavement, staring into the trees. Nothing. Fog. Dim shapes. Still no sound. I got back in and shut the door. We didn't talk for a while. Just drove. Eventually, signal came back. Maps started working. Jen pulled up our location and said, "We're about where we should be. No gaps. No rerouting." Her phone buzzed. A backlog of notifications came through. We reached the outskirts of Rainier a few minutes later. Fog thinned out by the time we hit the bridge. Street lights, cars, normal stuff. But here's the thing that stuck with me. Later that night, after I dropped Jen off and got home, I checked the time on my dashboard log. My car's connected to the manufacturer app. It keeps trip records. The drive home was logged as starting at 7:18 p.m. and ending at 9:01 p.m. It usually takes an hour and 15 max, even with fog. We were on the road just over 100 minutes. Not crazy, not a massive gap. But when I thought about how long we'd been parked on that shoulder, how long it felt like we were sitting in the silence watching that glow, it didn't line up. Jen texted me later that night. She said, "Do you think it's weird we both didn't feel scared?" I didn't know how to answer that.